probably not going to be doing a ton. Just playing some Warhammer and watching some videos that I queued up. But alright, let's just get into that. There's not really much in the news. I mean, there's a few things in the news, but it's all the same fucking story, so. Nothing really huge has changed. So, yeah. I forgot to. Yeah, so we're just gonna watch this Bosch video. I'm gonna put it on probably one and a half speed. Probably not watch the
You're
whole
gonna have to
video
get
through,
used to asking questions that might make you a little bit uncomfortable.
Reactionary takes.
We'll get past the introduction. I probably can't.
Okay. The first one is liberal. When people talk about what a liberal is, or what liberalism is generally, there are two definitions, a colloquial one and one that's, I guess, a little bit more politically accurate. Some people use liberal to mean like anyone vaguely on the left. That's really common with conservatives in this country, and that's just not a very helpful term. What liberal means, generally, are people who adhere to the ideology of liberalism, which emerged from the Enlightenment and is associated with a set of ideas, including, among others, democracy, free trade, laissez-faire capitalism, civil rights, that sort of thing. Basically, most countries today on Earth are informed in some way by the Enlightenment and by liberalism. The economic system that
John Locke was the one who founded liberalism, and he is correct on what a lot of people just define liberalism as just anything to the left, which it's not. Some forms of liberalism are right-wing.
Is usually capitalism, because capitalism is meant to be sort of an invocation of these principles of freedom and egalitarianism. And politically, liberal governments tend to defer to things like constitutions, like democracy, a republic, representative interests of the population being represented in government, that sort of thing. Liberalism is today, by far, the most influential political ideology. A lot of people think liberalism is like this hard stop wall, and then like past that you have a bunch of other definitions. It's not actually true. There are elements of liberalism that feed into fascism, and there are elements of liberalism that feed into socialism. So, for example, the ideas of democracy and egalitarianism are ones that are very typically evoked by socialists, and those are liberal ideals. And when it comes to fascists, the obsession with private property, and with capitalist enterprise, and with well, they wouldn't call this that, I guess, but antagonism between people of different economic classes, that also tends to feed into the way that fascism comes about. So really, liberalism encompasses a lot, and it can lead into a lot. I don't think it's like an exclusively positive or negative thing. When it comes to conservatism, what does conservative mean? This definition really isn't as clear cut. Usually people just mean conservative.
I already
like
defined what
reactionary of
conservatism
somebody
is.
Who believes there's something in the past that...
And I said that it was basically the trying to conserve natural law, trying to conserve hierarchies, trying to conserve morality, I guess, too. Yeah, so those.
They want to preserve. But that doesn't always end up really describing conservative behaviors. There are conservatives, for example, who want to push towards something that's never really existed before.
Yeah.
We see that all the time with the way this country is run. The abolition of, say, for example, private schooling, or sorry, not private schooling, public schooling, the deference of...
I would say that, no. I feel like the beginning of our country, there was no public schooling. There was, like you could go and pay for a tutor and stuff. You could go to college, and then you got schooled through churches a lot of the time. But no, he's wrong on this point. He's
of everything to
wrong.
the free market. That's not an old idea. That's kind of like a new thing, but conservatives push for it anyway. Here's the definition that I like to use, okay? And it's the balance between the left
And the reason why he's saying that the abolition of private schooling isn't an old thing was because private schooling wasn't a thing for a while.
and the right. If you want to use conservative to just mean like people who are on the right, I think that's about as good as one you're going to get. For me, and this is very subjective, when I think of somebody who's on the right, I think of somebody who wants to preserve or to promote hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly.
The idea that different people deserve
Exactly.
different things in life, that some people's places
Okay,
above
now-
others and some people's
see.
places below others, and this can take a million forms. This can be about gay.
Now he's I agree with him on that, but he's doing it in a way of saying that hierarchy is a bad thing, which I don't think hierarchy is a bad thing. I think that it's just natural. There's no way to get around hierarchy. So why would you can't even try to get around hierarchy unless if you make another form of hierarchy almost.
In straight people, trans and cis people, it can be about economic performance, the wealthiest and the poorest. There are so many ways this can come about. Conservatism is about promoting and defending those systems. Yeah, a natural order of sorts that needs to be preserved. And you see this all the time in conservative policy.
Okay, yeah, that's what he's
pretty
saying.
much all policy that Republicans push for today in America is conservative in the sense that it seems to either preserve or exacerbate some kind of inequality. On the other hand, when I say something's on the left, I say
Yeah,
the
see, now he's calling it inequality, which, I mean, technically it could be called that, but I feel like a lot of people have to work for their upper hand in life. Or, I mean, yeah, people are born with upper hands in life, too. So do you not want them to succeed? Because then they'd have no reason to try. Yeah. See, so he is right on what conservatism is. He just is wrong on his morality towards conservatism, towards like hierarchy and stuff. He thinks that hierarchy is bad. I would argue that hierarchy is good.
opposite, that it's a push for egalitarianism, an effort to flatten the hierarchy, to make it less uneven, less hierarchical. So those are really vague general definitions that I tend to use, and I think they explain right and left tendencies better than any other simple definition. But if you want to just say something's conservative, I would just say it's to the right, or it's promoting a hierarchy. So that's liberal and conservative, put down flatly. I defer to all of you.
Yeah.
Hit me with it. I
No,
want to see terms.
he's
What
completely
is
right
classical
on
liberalism?
both of
Classical
these.
liberalism generally just refers to the original ideology of liberal philosophers. So classical liberals tend to defer back to Enlightenment thinkers for political and economic solutions to today's
Yeah.
problems. Of course, there are a lot of people who will say they're classical liberals when in reality they just
Enlightenment
mean they don't
thinking is
actually know what
fucking
liberalism
stupid,
is.
though.
So, libertarianism. Libertarianism's a big one. So, libertarianism.
He's going to say that libertarianism was originally a socialist ideology, which is true. But then he's going to make the argument that that's the true form of libertarianism, and that socialism is actually the way that you get rid of freedom instead of free market
It was a
capitalism.
left-wing term. You're not going to guess this, but the word libertarianism was actually about maximizing liberty. That's what it came from. And the reason why this is fundamentally what the left
he's
is principle. If you
he's
actually
going
read
into
Marx,
exactly
I'd
what
say
I
have
said
not
he
read
was going to
Marx.
do.
What Marx
the
was
fuck
concerned
was
about
that
first and foremost
noise?
was freedom. The idea
Oh,
that
it
everyone
was
in
his
society, workers,
chat.
everyone, should
Like
have
he got a
maximum
donation or
freedom,
something.
the ability to the greatest possible extent.
See,
pursue
yeah,
what they want.
he's gonna say that socialism promotes freedom way more than capitalism. That's what, yeah.
To do in life. That's what libertarianism used to be about. Lefties used to promote that to the greatest possible extent. However, American libertarianism, or right libertarianism, depending on how you define it, is a corruption of those ideas. And I say corruption very literally because the people who co-opted that term literally bragged about taking it away from lefties. And right libertarianism just basically seems to be about eliminating government intervention to the greatest possible extent, with the exception of the police, military, and protecting private property rights. That really seems to be it. Every libertarianism has a different set of definitions for what they believe in, you know? Like, seriously. And anarcho-capitalists tend to just take that to an even further extreme. Some anarcho-capitalists call themselves minarchists, which means they don't want any state at all, except for the police and the military, which So
He
you wanna
wants
keep,
me
like,
to
the
move
most
my
forceful
hero,
elements of the state,
but-
get rid of everything else. Okay. But in my experience,
Oh.
libertarian
Okay,
and
it wants me to
anarcho-capitalists
move
tend to be
that
used really
hero.
interchangeably by people who subscribe to either idea. It really, I guess, just depends on to what extent you want to eliminate the presence of the government. Now, I don't think that right libertarianism is real libertarianism, in large part because the point of original leftist
Yeah,
libertarianism was
see,
freedom
he's-
from hierarchy. I mean,
he is
liberty.
making-
Whereas anarcho-capitalism and right libertarianism.
See, he said freedom from hierarchy, and then he's like, I mean, it's liberty, which I feel like liberty is different than freedom from hierarchy. Hierarchy is inevitable. I would say that libertarianism is the freedom to climb up hierarchy in the easiest way.
Defers a lot of power by default to corporate entities. We saw how this played out back in the old days of homesteading in corporate towns. If you don't really have much law in an area, you just let private enterprises use free exchange and free association to determine employment and contracts. You end up forming relations that are basically identical to feudalism. It's actually possible to arrive at feudalism with nothing but free association. Free association being a common libertarian term for contracts and modes of engagement which are based entirely on like mutual self-interest and consent. But you can arrive at feudalism purely through free association, depending on how much property and power one side starts out with. Hopefully that makes sense. So I think that anarcho-capitalism, libertarianism, in the ways they tend to be described and evoked, they tend to fall similarly on a spectrum. What about progressive and reactionary? Progressive and reactionary, honestly, I just think are used synonymously with left or right, respectively, though in line with social issues. A progressive person is a person who wants the abolition of hierarchies in social issues. A reactionary is a person who wants additional hierarchy or to preserve existing hierarchy. And so,
What was he saying there? I hate how I can't just do like what I can on my phone and just double click on the side and then it'll go back. That's annoying as fuck to me.
I think that one's fairly straightforward. It's basically just the identity-based line of right versus left. Let's see. State capitalism. State capitalism has a couple of used definitions, but the most common one that I see.
State capitalism. That would be where the state uses capitalism for its own means, I guess.
And the one that I like to use most is a authoritarian state, which is capitalist in enterprise. It has mostly free trade, private ownership of property, property relations, that sort of thing. But the interests and the productive elements of those capitalist
I'm gonna go get
enterprises
myself a robe
are done
real quick.
in the service of the state. Think of it as capitalism with extra nationalism sprinkled on top of it, you know? So there are different ways of expressing this. For example, there was a ton of privatization in Nazi Germany. In fact, the term privatization was coined for what happened in Nazi Germany. But do you think those corporations had the ability to make what they wanted and sell to who they wanted? No. You got to be a powerful business autocrat as long as you were serving the interests of the Nazi state. And I feel very similarly about the Soviet Union, though not exactly in the same way. In the Soviet Union, you have state capitalism in a slightly different way. You preserve a fundamentally hierarchical system of economic production, so you have party officials in the Soviet Union dictating labor distribution and the way these workplaces are run, and the wealth and power of these workplaces are deferred to the economic upper crust, but all of this is done in the service of the state. Those are two different kinds of state capitalism. Maybe it'd be better to have like two more distinct terms for them, but I think that they kind of fall in line similarly. China
What
falls
is he
somewhere between them,
talking
by the way.
about here?
The Chinese market is absolutely
Oh,
a
he's
form of state
yeah,
capitalism.
yeah, I
Because
would
as
say that China is a
rampantly
form of state
industrious and
capitalism.
capitalistic as China is, at the end of the day, the Chinese Communist Party has an unbelievable amount of authority when it comes to dictating the economic production in a way that benefits the state. So hence, state capitalism.
Yeah,
Private
no, I
property,
don't
private
think
property
that
relations, capitalist
China is
hierarchy, but
really,
you're doing it for the state, baby. You're doing it for the country, okay?
exactly
China's not state
communist
capitalist, it's incredibly
anymore.
privatized. You have to listen again. Privatization can be a part of state capitalism. That's the first thing that I said. It's that the state capitalist enterprise directs the privatization towards the interests of the state. And if you don't think the CCP has the ability to keep corporations in line to make sure they're benefiting the broader interests of the CCP, then I have a bridge to sell you. That's one of the reasons they've grown up so big. Talk about social democracy. So social democracy,
gotta go to that
generally
golden
speaking,
tower
is a
right
term
there.
used to refer to, this sounds so patronizing, but it's like nice capitalism. Capitalism has a lot of externalities, and a lot of harm is done by the ways in which the wealthy and the poor, the owners and the workers interact with each other. Social democracy is essentially, what if we maintain the basic, economic elements of capitalism, but then we use the taxation that we derive from the population to put into social programs and wealth redistribution programs, and basically you keep the economic system, but then you use the incredible wealth derived from it and redirect it towards the interests of the population. Social democracy, in my opinion, is a highly defensible, probably the most defensible economic system that's currently implemented in the world today at anything even approximating a large scale. I don't think there's really such a thing as like a socialist state at the moment, but there are social democracies out there, and they're a hell of a lot better than what America is right now, in my humble opinion. Oh, tanky. So this is one that I get a lot. Tanky is one that I cover a lot because I argue with these people all the time. So I've talked about this in the past, but when I describe a tanky, what I'm usually saying is...
It's like a Stalinist. basically. A tanky is someone who like supports Soviet Russia.
Tarian whose aesthetic interests lean towards Soviet or communist
So it's
aligned
like
countries.
It's like people who actually understand what communism becomes. Like him, he thinks that communism is going to be like purely democracy based, and that you're going to be able to, he's like an anarcho-communist almost.
Who are principally interested in opposition to American political hegemony rather than a positive interest in certain ideological positions. So one thing that I've noticed when I argue with tankies, for example, they very, very, very rarely talk about the working class. So rarely. The people who they talk all the time about Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea, China, the Soviet Union, Assad, whatever, they talk about leaders, they talk about states, they talk about military and revolutionary activity, but so rarely do they talk about the working class, which is kind of the point of socialism, a little bit, kind of an important one. All right, I'd say fairly essential to the whole equation. I often call tankies red fascists, and when I say that, I'm being sincere. I noticed a lot of the same tendencies from them just being reflected onto a different set of national aesthetics. Take, for example, when I was arguing
Yes,
with
I am
genocide
hung.
deniers, they
I have a
engaged in
giant
lot of the same
wiener.
tendencies. This ethnic group has tendencies towards violence and they need to be cold and or disciplined. Our state is the greatest state and there is a conspiracy the rest of the world has against.
Yeah, he's basically talking about people who are like Stalinist.
Us that we must fight against in order to bring our people to power.
Tanky's just like a
if you run it all
slang
down,
word,
like
too. It's not a
hyper, like
fucking...
xenophobia. Really,
It's not
often
an
weird,
actual,
like reactionary takes that they'll
like
bust out.
political
If it's convenient to the interests
ideology.
of
No tanky
Look,
calls
one thing I
himself a
remember most fondly,
tanky.
I was talking with a person who was defending Stalin, and he was saying the reason why Stalin sent gay people to gulags was because of Western imperialism. That were it not for the tyrannical boot of America and America-aligned nations the world round, Stalin would have let the gays go, but he just had no choice. That's one of the vibes that I get. So I tend to call them red fascists. If you see me on Twitter for any length of time, you'll probably see me arguing about or against one of these types of people. But yeah, that's generally what I mean when I say tankies. What's the difference between tankies, Nazguls, and Nazis? That is an excellent question, and for me, the difference is largely a...
I would say that it's largely... I would say that it's more of an economic thing. Yeah, no, he is right. It is aesthetics, yeah. No, he's completely right. It is aesthetics, for sure.
So, I just described what a tanky is. A Nazgul is it means National Bolshevik, but that's...
Yeah, so it'd be like...
Colloquially, what it tends to refer to is something called a Strasserite, or a left-wing Nazi. That seems oxymoronic, but what it really refers to, there was a wing of the original Nazi party that was under, one of the sub-leaders of the Nazi party, Strasser, and he was a leftist in the sense that he believed in a proletarian revolution against the bourgeoisie. That sounds pretty leftist, right?
But he also thought that the Jews were controlling the world, and he was very conservative. So he didn't like the gays. He didn't like,
wanted a white.
But
Aryan
you can look at like
proletarian
Stalin too, and
against
Stalin
the
didn't like
Jewish,
the gays.
brown, black bourgeoisie to secure an ethno-state socialist country. Basically, it's what if you took a Nazi, but you added revolutionary class politics onto it? Now,
all right.
Sorry, the Strasser brothers, not one person named Strasser. My apologies. Now, with all that being said, in my experience, usually people who call themselves Nazguls or third positionists, that's another common term that tends to overlap with it, they seem to care a lot more about the Nazi part than the socialist Nazi part, I did a debate with Stryker a while ago, and if you'll notice, the Nazgul types, they do not talk about the working class that much. They really, really don't, much like tankies. It seems like the only times they evoke the working class socialist rhetoric is when they're using it as some kind of smear against, like, bourgeois democracy, some kind of smear against, like, the existing political order. But it's done in the service of a broader ideology, Nazism. The original Nazis did the exact same thing, by the way. The original Nazis, they were very dishonest about their political intentions before they actually came to power. They had these long lists of pro-worker policies that they were promising the poor, underserved
every
German
single
population. All this
fucking
went out the window when they achieved power. It's a cynical
every
way of
single
appealing to a
group
desperate
that does this
middle class with
always
socialist
is
rhetoric,
lying
which has always
about
been
their
very
true.
effective to the desperate, before tossing it out in favor of, well, Nazism. So in essence, what describes the difference between tankies, Nazguls, and Nazis? In my opinion, the rhetoric they use to achieve their goal, which usually ends up being an ethnically homogenous authoritarian state that wields private enterprise as a way of securing state domination, which promotes conspiracism and xenophobia against the outside world, which suppresses human rights in favor of a narrative that pacifism is trafficking with the enemy, etc., etc. I feel like they lean in very similar directions. Are they all the same necessarily? No, they're not, but man, do you start to see patterns when you've argued with enough people like that. What's the difference between communism and socialism? Marx didn't really distinguish between the two, but just like one's lower form of the other. But as I understand it, socialism is comprised of two fundamental components, okay? These are the two big ones. and there's no like hard line for when a state becomes socialist, but these are the criteria that tend to matter the most. One of them is public ownership of the means of production, or collective ownership. The working class control.
I would say the difference between communism and socialism is socialism trying to become communism, and communism is like their end goal.
The industry in that country, okay? Now, there are different ways of achieving that. That can be a highly democratic state with a lot of decommodification, so the state owns a lot of the industry. That can be worker cooperatives, which is my personal preference. There are a lot of ways to handle that. And the second major component
do nothing.
of
Colonize,
socialism
for sure.
is decommodification, or what is sometimes referred to as abolition of the commodity form. You can break that down. Abolition means to get rid of. Commodity form means economic production for the sake of making commodities. That is to say, you produce things to sell them. So if you eliminate the commodity form and you have collective control of the means of production, you have socialism. Are there any hard lines here? I don't really know, and I don't really think so. But that's what people tend to look for. Tradcon versus neocon. Tradcon is usually a term used to refer to people, colloquially, who idealize the social aesthetics or the social politics of a previous era. In the United States, the most common era, you'll see people...
Yeah, neocon... Yeah, this was a stupid fucking question, Tradcon versus neocon. They're... Like, this is so easy to define.
Refer to as 1950s America. This is a very common tactic by people on the right. They'll like post Norman Rockwell paintings and advertisements of board games from like 1953 of like a white family wearing sweater vests all smiling at each other. Oh, a tradcon. I want to live in the suburbs and a white picket fence and have like 6 children or something. It's either nuclear family, social conservatism,
That's
racial
what I am.
separatism. That's a big component of traditional conservatism.
Well,
sometimes they don't say that.
No, that's not a big form of traditional conservatism. I mean, some people might think that that's how you should do it. Some tradcons, but not all. Not even close to all.
Gay people don't exist anymore, trans people don't exist anymore, etc., etc. As for neoconservative, this is going to shock you guys, but neoconservative and neoliberal mean almost exactly
the exact
same
same thing, yeah.
Neoliberal, you generally hear that term associated with
neoconservative is trying to enforce neoliberalism. Is the only fucking thing that's different. Neoliberalism is the economic is like the economics behind it, and then neoconservatism is trying to enforce neoliberalism.
Sure, and Reagan. Neoliberalism is you take the... Not really? Yes, it is. Hit it. You have a liberalism in its original form, which is hundreds of years old. Neoliberalism is like 20th century liberalism. Neoliberalism, are we following the way these terms play off each other? And what this tends to mean in practice is it refers to deregulation, globalization, free trade, austerity. Basically, you have modern capitalism. Most economies these days are neoliberal in the sense that they are modern evocations of the capitalist economy. They are what happens when you take capitalism and you frame it in the context of late 20th century or early 21st century geopolitics. Usually neoliberal is used as a sort of derogatory.
Fuck, this guy's gonna
neoliberals
attack
tend to not get along with social democrats. Social democrats tend to believe in high taxation and redirecting the commonwealth towards social betterment. Neoliberals tend to be more in favor of austerity and deregulation, allowing corporations and the wealthy to get away with more. Neoliberals tend to be the most fervent advocates for the economic system that we live in today. It's also a term that's not always used correctly. Biden, for example, isn't a full-on neoliberal. There are a lot of things that he says and he does that lean more towards social democracy than neoliberalism. Like, neoliberalism looks more like Reagan and Thatcher, like just this shameless adherence to just cut taxes, stop spending on social programs, deregulate industry. But Biden doesn't go in that direction as hard. I mean, he has his, the infrastructure bill, some of the other stuff that he's done. Neoconservatism is just the reactionary wing of neoliberalism. Neoconservatism is basically the same economically. It just also means that you hate gay people and you're more willing to wage war on brown people abroad. Does that make sense? Basically, you take the economic framework of neoliberalism, but you're a reactionary. That's pretty much it, really. Being neoconservative is worse than being neoliberal because you're also socially reactionary.
Yeah,
but fundamentally, they tend to refer to like the same underlying economic paradigm. Is it about immigration? Neocons tend to be more anti-immigration, which is interesting because it's actually a contradiction of the liberal values. A neoliberal is rampantly pro-immigration because it benefits the economy. It benefits, it's beneficial to the business, and it allows us to take advantage of a larger labor pool. I'm in favor of immigration. I just think it's a good thing in general. Neocons tend to be more restrictive of immigration because you have a conflict between two different principles. On one hand, you want businesses to thrive. On the other hand, you don't like immigration because being anti-immigration can feed into a lot of, xenophobic, nativist, and nationalistic sentiments that get you reelected. So it's really, a balance there.
I don't know why Let's see if I can get this guy now. Has successfully impaired army belonging to... Escaped unscathed. Based. That's fucking good. Hey, babe. Ooh. I don't agree with it. It's evil. Alright, babe, I'm on stream right now. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye. Love you.
But fundamentally, they refer to very similar economic policies. I'll just assume that it fundamentally makes sense. Yeah, the neoconservatism and neoliberalism are basically the left and the right wing of the same general economic and neopolitical or geopolitical framework. Oh God, we're gonna stammer on all our words here. Critical race theory, please explain it in full. Oh sure.
This. I don't know what he's gonna say about what critical race theory is. I actually am pretty interested on what he's gonna say.
A little bit from the basic political terms here. So critical race theory, essentially,
it's basically just what I would say is that it's Marxism made into race, I guess.
Critical race theory is basically, what if you took critical theory and you applied it to race?
Yeah. Okay.
Critical theory is a sociological theory, funnily enough the one I specialized in, that is designed to analyze social problems and social dynamics through the framework of different classes fighting against one another, the different interests of different groups
and then
clashing.
You say that.
So a critical theorist might look at American society as the product of hundreds of years of clashes between groups with different ideological and identity-based goals. So, for example, you have the obvious critical theory line, the bourgeois and the proletariat. Critical theory is derived in many ways from Marxist theory. That's an easy one. But what about, say, for example, black and white people? Well, throughout the history of America, I think it's safe to say that black and white people have had fairly different political interests, particularly when it comes to whether or not one should be able to own the other, whether or not one should be considered a second-class citizen. These are very, very, very different political interests, and they clash in meaningful and significant and often lethal ways throughout society's, history, throughout this country's history. Critical race theory is the analytical lens of critical theory specifically applied to the modern racial dynamics.
Should I do AI control? I didn't even know that you can do that.
Critical race theory here in America would look very different to critical race theory applied in, say, India or Pakistan.
Yeah,
or
I'll
Russia.
do AI
the
control with
that. Are so different
especially
that the
since
analytical
it's low
framework would almost itself look like diametrically opposed. There would be like
I
a
almost
completely
just
different
want to auto do it, but
the Republican Party does not like critical race theory, in large part because critical race theory encourages people to understand that America's history is a fundamentally racist one. A lot of people interpret that as some kind of smear on white people.
See, he's fucking stupid.
It is certainly not. There is absolutely no denying that people in power in
It
America
is a
have spent
smear
centuries
on
trying
white
to use that
people.
power to disempower and disenfranchise black people. There is no getting around that. That is a fact, just a fact of the matter, and learning about that makes us all stronger. It's not meant to make anybody feel guilty. I am white. I have never felt guilty because I am white. I will never feel guilty because I am white. It
Yeah,
is
but
just a
other
matter
people
of
say that you
analyzing
should feel.
the world through that
People
lens.
who are
Now, with that being
critical.
said, there are ways to take a legitimate analytical framework and misuse it. That's the case with any analytical framework. There have been instances where critical race theory has been used to justify arguments and optics that I strongly disagree with. For example, with regards to Robin DiAngelo and that Coca-Cola PowerPoint that I went over some time ago on stream, that would be an example of taking the tenets of critical race theory and using them in a way that I think is diametrically opposed to the outcomes one should look towards through the sociological theory. Does that make sense? What about technocracy? Technocracy is a type of society or a social framework where you defer
think
policy decisions
technology
to
should
expertise.
control-
It doesn't actually
yeah.
mean to like a big AI or anything like that. A technocrat is a person who thinks like, democracy is great and all, but is the population really equipped to make decisions on these issues? Maybe we should just defer to a set of experts. You know, you have your scientists and your doctors and your engineers, and these people should make the decisions for society rather than like the people at large. Now, there are instances where I think there's a benefit to deferring to the expertise of some
Am I
authorities.
on the top
for
of a
example,
hill?
Dr.
Yeah,
Fauci,
so
and more
wait.
broadly, like the pandemic. Sometimes you have like an overwhelming emergency
Nope.
where democracy is not a sufficient framework for dealing with things. We do the same things during wartime, by the way. Do we democratically vote on which military actions to take? No. We have military officials or experts whose job it is to do those without any democratic input whatsoever. And to be honest with you, I have a feeling that a democratically run
I
military
think
would
that
probably be a little bit
that's-
less functional.
I think
in
that
the sense
that's
so wait,
a
be clear,
good
I'm not
way
saying
to use
it'd be less functional
technocracy,
in that I
but
don't want us to be
not
able to vote
if
on going to
everyone
war.
sh-
I mean,
everyone
like,
has to
sir,
get
do
the
we take this
fucking
town?
jab.
I don't know. Let's go back to the states.
Why are
and
these
get
guys
Congress on
running
it.
away?
Like, you know, during an ongoing military engagement, like feels like would slow down the process a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, sir, there's a sniper in that building. We need to take the shot. Okay, I've sent a wire over to Congress. We should 2 to 4 weeks have an authorization. Yeah, like that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Sometimes
no, that would be really fucking stupid. He is right.
deferring to expertise is helpful. I don't think that it solves most
I
problems.
don't
and
think
have
that
a
when
tremendous
it
amount of
comes
faith
to
in the
your civilians that you should be able to enforce all sorts of shit on them, like especially with in the medical realm.
political and social savviness of many experts. I'm being a little hyperbolic here with my military technocracy example, but I'm sure you can understand that in some emergency situations, deferring to an expert can be very...
Hey, Transplay Nerds, it's your favorite
I just
part
want
of every
them to
session.
come to
You
me,
guessed
bro.
it, sponsor Connie. If you play TTRPGs,
very, very helpful. How about a meritocracy? A meritocracy just refers to a society or to a system that is where people's positions, where the benefits that people receive are determined by their performance, by their merit.
Yeah.
A meritocracy, it's determined by their merit. I think most people would agree.
Some people say that we live in a meritocracy. It's kind of hard to exactly define what a meritocracy is, but yeah, that's basically
That a
what I'm saying.
meritocracy is a utopian system. The idea that everyone gets what they deserve as a political system is achievable in the real world is ridiculous. Like, it's self-defining. What
I
is a
think
meritocracy? Well, everyone
capitalism
gets
is closest to a meritocracy, though.
what they deserve. How do you determine who get what? What? Well, whatever they end up with is what they would have deserved because they get what they deserve. You know, like, wow, that sounds really cool. How do you do that? If a person ever says that we live in a meritocratic system, you are legally allowed to tie their shoelaces together when they're looking away so that they trip when they try to walk. We do not live in a meritocratic system. Nobody does. Political and economic systems are not meritocratic. There is a huge amount of luck and bias and cultural and hereditary influence that plays into people's success in life. It's probably always going to be that way.
I bet that he's going to say that socialism is the closest way to get to it, though.
To some extent, but there are ways to alleviate that. The closest things that we have to meritocracies are probably like the Olympics, athletic events, where the most
Wow.
talented
Okay.
people, the strongest, the fastest, the most agile,
He is
legitimately are the
right
people
about this.
who end up doing the best and getting the most accolades. Even then, there are biases in the accessibility of these athletic fields. Different people have different levels of accessibility to sports because they had more or less wealth early on. They were around or not around people who encourage their habits.
Fuck this,
there's no
I've
such thing as
got to
meritocracy.
attack.
But it's a nice ideal to strive towards. What is capitalism? I feel like I described capitalism back when I described liberalism and when I described state capitalism. But essentially, capitalism is an economic system that's fundamentally based on free trade, principally, private property rights, contract negotiation, those sorts of things. The system that we live in now, essentially. Basically, every country on Earth is capitalism.
I was just so annoyed
Capitalism,
that they were
as it
sitting up
exists
there
now,
that
is
I
more
have to
correctly described
attack
as laissez-faire
because they're not.
capitalism. Because the previous type of capitalism that we had, the previous type of capitalism that was common the world round, was mercantile capitalism. Mercantile capitalism, or mercantilism, was an economic system that had many of the hallmarks of capitalism today. There were businesses.
I actually don't know about this mercantile capitalism.
capitalist. People could start businesses, and they could do business, and they could trade. The main difference is that there was a heavy amount of direct
Whoa!
autocratic control over the operation and limits of these businesses.
Where
and
did
they were
those niggas
usually
come
wielded
from?
alongside the powers and interests of the state. So does anyone know the history, for example, of the East India Trade Company? Back in those mercantilist days, you had a lot of what were essentially mega corporations, but they worked directly in line with the kingdoms that they were a part of as basically an extension of the political and imperialist interests of their time. So they weren't really private corporations as we understand them today because they didn't have the same freedoms, rights, or responsibilities, but they also had powers that corporations today don't have. So mercantile capitalism was basically, what if we had free enterprise, but only as free as the king wanted it? And nowadays, you can start a business even if your president really doesn't like it. You can actually do that. Even if Biden really doesn't like you personally, you actually have the ability to start
annoying.
a business. That's nice, isn't it? There's also a more codified set of trade laws that regulate.
Did
the,
my monster
maintenance and
die?
Construction of businesses. It's not so in line with like the feudal system with its aristocrats and lords pledging fealty to a monarch
he
and
didn't
the way
die.
they control their territories and so on and so forth. Theocracy? A theocracy is just a system that's controlled by a church, isn't it? Like a theocracy would be a system where like the clergy or the church has a tremendous amount of control over the operation of the country or system or what have you. Yeah. Generally cringe. Generally not a good thing. Objectivism. Objectivism is an ideology that people usually use in reference to Ayn Rand. Objectivism is basically...
I do not agree with objectivism. It's like, oh, whatever you feel like you should do, you should do.
mega super duper hyper extra super double triple libertarianism. I wish I could describe it like better than that, but I can't because it's stupid and so is Ayn Rand. So basically Ayn Rand, if you've ever read Atlas Shrugged, basically it's like, what if like business leaders were like the only people who did anything and everyone else is stupid and a leech and a parasite and everyone just relies on them
That's not what I...
and all of society should be about giving them everything they want to, like, you know.
That's
Yeah,
not objectivism.
watch the Radical Reviewer video on Atlas Shrugged.
Although
I voice act
Atlas
5 minutes,
Shrugged
and it was
is
incredible,
about that,
you know?
but that's
Yeah, I
not what
debated here in York.
objectivism
That guy is an
is.
objectivist. You see how nice those ideas are there, you know. Do anarcho-primitivism. Anarcho-primitivism is a meme ideology.
Ted K!
Anarcho-primitivism is a meme ideology, okay? It's return to monkey. It's what if technology is bad for us, so we should go back to living in tribal societies. The funny
It's worse than what Ted K wanted. It's like go further back than what Ted K wanted, but a lot of people call Ted K an anarcho-primitivist.
thing is, I think that you can actually make a really strong argument for tribal societies having elements that are just beneficial to human beings that we don't adopt anymore. Like, for example, communal child rearing. I think that's something that humans are just better with. 2 people, that's not enough to raise a kid, in my opinion. Not in how the system today works. I don't think so. It takes a village to raise a kid, you know? Can you explain postmodernism? Yeah. So postmodernism is a... Oh, God, it means so many things.
Postmodernism is really fucking hard to explain. So I wonder what he's going to say about this.
Very generally, postmodernism is a philosophical framework which suggests it is not possible to describe truth and experience through a single narrative. It's like this huge movement, and the movement is essentially saying...
Yeah, the movement is like nothing actually is true.
We try to describe the human experience in singular ways. Marx was a modernist. The Marxist lens on society, on history, suggests
Yeah,
that
postmodernism
there
is
definite
basically saying
political
that
and historical
nothing
trend
is true.
which describes humanity. Historical materialism.
Like you can't
And
define
if you
anything.
understand this trend, you understand human historical progression. Now, Marx wouldn't have been so arrogant to assume that there was no other potential explanation for human civilization, that there was no other truth. But he would have argued that that is the truth. Like, that is the truthful thing. That is a modernist position. But postmodernism suggests that you can go beyond that, that the idea of there being a fundamental truth, a fundamental understanding of reality, isn't true. This is why people make fun of Jordan Peterson for the term postmodern neo-Marxist, because Marx was modernist, and postmodernism is not modernist. It's postmodernist. So that's why people tend to make fun of that term.
Yeah, but you can
Because
be...
it's neo-Marxism. Neo-Marxism isn't a real thing. I don't know what that means. I don't know what neo-Marxism means. So again, I'm trying to describe that's maybe one of the most complicated
It's
philosophical...
Marxists that have moved forward from Marx, because Marx was a materialist, and a lot of the Marxists are idealists now. Like a lot of the like what you would call neo-Marxists would be idealists.
Philosophical movements in all of human history down into like a couple of sentences. But generally
instead
speaking, the
of,
line is there is no one truth.
materialist.
Now keep in mind, that doesn't mean there's no such thing as truth. A postmodernist can make statements of truth. They would say that this is but a framework, a lens, a single facet of a broader understanding that no single narrative can hope to encapsulate, that there are many truths. And I generally agree with that, if that makes any sense. We all know neo-Marxist is just a dog whistle. Yeah, well, it's all like Frankfurt School stuff. But
No,
there's-
it's
I don't think
fucking
there's, like,
not
an
a dog
ideological trend
whistle.
called neo-Marxist, you know?
There's literally
What is market
Marxists who
socialism?
call
Market
themselves
socialism
neo-Marxists.
is an
so-
economy which has achieved
Shut
one
the
of
fuck
the
up.
two preconditions of a socialist society. Namely, you have succeeded in turning over the means of production to the workers. I like this through worker cooperatives, but you still have a market economy, so market socialism. Market socialism is, in my opinion, a very effective, plausible, and realistic transitionary step towards full socialism, where we work to further decommodify. That being said, I do think that markets have a place in any society, and that it's really about finding ways to maximize their utility and minimize their negative externalities. Why do people say that's not socialism? A lot of people enjoy gatekeeping and purity testing when it comes to the definitions of things like socialism, because, and I'm going to be
Damn,
totally
these
real
guys
here,
have a
socialists
large
get so few
range.
L's in the real world that they don't have much to do other than gatekeep other socialists to feel better than people who they could otherwise be working with. Unfortunately, given that there are no functioning socialist states on Earth right now, I guess they don't really have anything real to root for, so we all have to fight with each other, you know? The neo prefix just means contemporary, so neo-Marxist may be technically correct. Yeah, but there's no term neo-Marxist. Like, neoliberal doesn't just mean liberal but new. Like, a liberal who's, like, young or whatever. It means something. Neo-Marxist doesn't have that like a preset definition. I mean, you could call anything neo then if you really wanted to, because everything's new in the current moment.
What's a
Anarcho-syndicalism,
neo-fascist?
anarcho-communism. Okay, at this point, we're going to arrive at a problem. And the problem is that there are like 27 near-identical ideologies that begin with anarcho, and I feel like arguing over the differences between them. Every breath you spend on describing differences between them is a breath
Yeah,
that you spend fighting for the
anarcho-syndicalism
working
and
class. But as I
anarcho-communism are
understand it,
fucking like...
anarcho-syndicalism and anarcho-communism are not mutually exclusive. Anarcho-communism is just you use anarchist methods of organization and arrangement and political activism to achieve a communist society.
And then anarcho-syndicalism is one of those forms of anarcho-communism.
And anarcho-syndicalism means you attempt to achieve an anarchist society through a syndicalist framework. And syndicates are basically just mega-unions. So you would argue then that the path towards anarchism for an anarcho-syndicalist would be that you basically have, like, unions, and those unions, like, band together into, like, broader trade unions and, like, entire industry unions, and that they become viable political organizations in and of themselves, and that's through these, like, big political constructs that are designed to represent the interests of the workers that you achieve anarchism. Lovely idea, right? Anyway, these aren't mutually exclusive, you know? You're going to find there are many anarcho ideas that, I mean, they end up in basically the same place. What is a chauvinist?
Yeah.
I feel like a chauvinist, the term chauvinist gets used in so many
Yeah, I don't really know how to define chauvinist.
in so many different ways. Sometimes people use the term chauvinist in what I understood to be its traditional sense, which was a misogynist. Like, a chauvinist is like a haughty, like, arrogant guy who doesn't think very much of women. That's what I understood it to mean. But then there are also people who use the term Western chauvinist. And Western chauvinist means that you're like a reactionary advocate for the imperialist interests of the global north, or the West broadly. And when I see the term chauvinism used, I think the most consistent definition is that you're an advocate for superiority, or fundamentally that you're a reactionary. A chauvinist is like an individual who is promoting the supremacy of one group or one idea over another group or another idea. And even that's pretty broad, because then would you say, like, trans people are chauvinists of trans acceptance over non-trans acceptance? Probably not. It's usually used in conjunction with reactionary politics. It's not just supremacy, it's also supremacy with the goal of achieving hierarchy, if that makes sense. What is the global north and the global south? If you take a globe, and you look at the equatorial line, and you spin that globe, you will find that an overwhelming amount of the world's wealth is above that equator. The terms global north and global south are basically shorthands for powerful, domineering, capitalist countries with a lot of military and economic influence, and countries that, well, don't have those things. These terms are basically interchangeable with a lot of other terms that get used almost, like, interchangeably with each other, you know? So, for example, the West versus the rest of the world, the colonized versus the colonizers, they tend to mean similar things.
Money makes the world go round. And
We're just gonna attack each
round,
one of these because...
I don't think they all mean exactly the same thing, but God, nobody uses political terms correctly. What is a command economy? A command economy is any type of economy where the production and distribution of commodities is determined by central planning. That is to say, rather than there being some kind of market system to determine where these resources need to go, instead it's
Come on,
like
bro.
there's a central group of
Let's
people,
just
or
win
like
now.
an AI or something.
These people
which
keep
decides
running
or
away, and
determines
it's
what needs
annoying
to be
the
produced
fuck
and where
out
it
of
needs to go. Can you explain the difference between federalism and confederalism? Well, as I understand it, a federalist is usually an individual.
Confederalism is that you have... Confederalism is where you have different, like, states, and they're not under a federalist government. They're basically just all have contracts with each other. To where a federalism is where you have all these states that is controlled by one federal government. I wonder what he's gonna say.
Individual who believes in like a unified country with like a strong central authority, and a confederalist is usually somebody who believes the opposite. You want power to be distributed across like a variety of semi-autonomous bodies. In America, we'd call them states. and that power is sort of leveraged in a balance between all of those.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a states' rights versus national rights type dealio, you know?
Yeah.
What does feminism
I-
mean to you?
I would say that I'm
Third
more
wave
of a
feminism
confederalist.
is an intersectional movement designed to
confederalist
alleviate
than a
or eliminate
federalist.
gender biases and imbalances. I think that it's just as much pro-man as it is pro-woman, though I know there are plenty of people who
Feminism
disagree
is
with me on this.
cringe,
She
bro.
will never agree with me on this, but I really do think that 98% of Shu's problems with feminism come from second-wave feminists and not third-wave feminists. But aren't we already in the fourth wave? It really depends on who you ask. I promise. It
Yeah,
really
I
depends on who you ask.
don't even know what the
Zionism.
fuck we're in.
Zionism is another one of those terms that has so many definitions because it's such like a politically contentious term.
I
think
like
the
to
original
just
definition of
enslave
Zionism
them
literally just
always.
meant somebody who wants like a Jewish homeland, you know? And now people use it to mean like everything from
Should
a
we
person
attack
who
them
believes
again?
the Jews should have some homeland to people who will defend literally
Just
any war
kill
crime
this
committed by
guy
Israel,
because
you know?
he
and then,
attacked
like it's
me?
this wide spectrum
Well,
that you
no,
can fit like,
first
anywhere
we
within
go
that.
like this.
Unfortunately, I see the term Zionism
And then
used to
we go
describe
like
people
that.
from all
We get
across that
this
spectrum.
guy.
So that's my
We go
answer. It's that
boom.
vague, you know? Oh god, my nose is so itchy. All these cringe political terms, you know? Is it like the difference between black separatism and black nationalism, Vosh? It can be. I mean, it really depends on the intentions of the person who uses it. What does paleo mean before other ideologies? I think paleo generally is just... when
Aw,
people
what?
use paleo, I mean, it means old. That's what the term technically means. But usually when I see it used, like, as a political prefix, I don't think it always means that. I think basically paleo...
Get
the
out.
only time I see paleo used is paleo-conservative. And I think it means, like, super tradcon, basically. It's also a term that
That's
I've only
what I
seen
would
used by
consider
nonsense.
myself.
Paleo-conservative. Like, you have tradcon. Okay,
No,
but that's
you're
not
not a
fun. You're
fucking-
paleocon, baby. I don't know if it means anything. It seems like another one of those terms that's kind of like an internet meme term, where it doesn't have like a really strong basis or...
It was.
You know what I mean?
It originated after World War II. What the fuck do you mean it doesn't have a strong basis?
What is a democratic socialist? A democratic socialist is a socialist who does not want to be mistaken for an authoritarian socialist. That's pretty much it. That's really the only thing, you know? Really just an optics thing. Let's see. Socialism with Chinese characteristics, Vosh. What is it? In my opinion, if anyone ever uses the term socialism with blank characteristics, what they actually mean is not socialism. What they actually mean is, I like this country, so I can't say it's socialism because it's not. So it's socialism with X characteristics, which usually what it actually means is that it's a social democracy with like very few hints of socialism, but they have a red flag. I don't think much of this term. Define monarchism. A system with a monarch. I'll leave you all to fill in the spaces there. What is globalism? Globalism is an economic and political philosophy that's reliant, or at least like an advocate for, like international cooperation, free trade,
Globalism is cringe.
global integration.
That's what it
and, like,
is.
top-level transnational
fucking
governments, like the United
cringe.
Nations or the EU. Globalists tend to advocate for those things. If you want to come off like really cool when you're a socialist, you can just say you're an internationalist, and it means basically the same thing from a leftist perspective, but people won't look at you like you just said you're a Hillary Clinton supporter. Basically, if you're ever around Shoe on Head and you want to say that you support like cooperation
Yeah!
amidst like
it.
economic and political systems the world around,
He's
okay,
dead.
you say you're an internationalist, all right? You say you're an internationalist, and you'll be fine. You'll get away with it.
I wanted to kill that motherfucker.
What's the origin of the term
And I
leftist?
did.
Does it necessitate socialism? What was leftist before Marx? A couple of
How am I
questions there. I'll just
supposed
answer
to
the origin of the term leftist?
kill and eat?
No idea.
Oh.
Everyone has a different definition of leftist. Some people mean it to use anybody who's on the left broadly, like a Democrat. I tend to use it to refer to people who are socialists, people who want to replace capitalism with a socialist framework who are progressive.
What is he
For me,
talking
it means
about?
progressive socialist. But some people would say, like,
Leftist?
for example,
Yeah, leftist would be. There's a lot of different forms.
Sam
of
Cedar
leftists.
is a progressive. He's not a socialist, but he's a heavy social democrat. If Sam Cedar called himself a leftist, would I really argue with him? When he agrees with me on like almost any fight that I'm going to take with the current American political system? Like, I don't know. I feel like it's pretty broad. Pretty broad, you know? What is a race realist? The term race realist is a dog whistle for scientific racist. A scientific racist is a person who tries to justify racism by presenting, they call it scientific, by attempting to present scientific evidence which indicates that
Well,
there's
it's like
significant
saying that
differences
there's-
between racial groups, both physically and
It's like
mentally.
They
and
bring
that
up
they usually
a
then lead
lot
to
of
political discussions afterwards, you know,
bring up a lot of IQ tests and everything.
leading
Yeah.
to it from that point. It came from the French Revolution, the term leftist. Interesting. I didn't know that. What is intersectionality?
Yeah,
Intersectionality.
Left and right came from the French Revolution. The way that it came from the French Revolution was that during the French Revolution, in Congress, there was people who sat on the right, and that was the people who wanted to uphold the monarchs and everything. And then on the left were the leftists, the ones who were the revolutionaries. Yep.
is a sociological framework, a very essential one. I will always go to bat defending how based intersectionality is. It's a framework which essentially says there are a million ways in which every individual, in which every person, every system benefits and harms people. Me, for example, I'm white. Most of the time, that's to my benefit. Almost always, that's to my benefit. I'm straight. Wait. Oh God. Oh my God. I'm buying into the memes right now. Don't listen.
I
I'm not
thought he
straight,
was
okay?
gay.
No, the mask came off. No.
He always talks about fucking being on Grindr and shit. I thought he was gay as fuck.
I'm I'm pan, I'm pansexual, which benefits because there are lots of cuties out there, but sometimes they can come back and bite me. I'm American.
This guy's gay as
I'm
fuck.
autistic. I'm 6'2". I have
I'm
fairly symmetrical
autistic.
facial features. I have this and that. I'm fat. I'm whatever. There are so many categories that you can put me in, and sometimes they benefit me, and sometimes they don't. And for me personally, most of the time they benefit me. But intersectionality is about taking a look at all of those things holistically and saying, you are affected by all of these
Intersectionality is
systems,
fucking cringe
all of
as
these
hell.
conditions, all of these terms, these biases, these categories. And the only way to understand you is to understand the ways in which they interact. That was the failure of old social justice movements, some of them at least. Second wave feminism was pro-woman, but it tended to be pretty racially limited, pretty much just limited to white women, white middle-class women. But tell me, how useful is feminism if it's only coming for white middle-class women? Not really. I don't think so. And in order to understand feminism, and understand the ways in which to address gendered issues, you can't just understand gender, can you? You have to understand race too.
Let's get this
Because black
place.
women and white women don't go through the same issues. Black men and white men don't, okay?
I mean, yes, but also, like, who gives a fuck? And sometimes they do.
There are variable
like-
differences, ways in which these systems interact to produce different outcomes. And that's why intersectionality is valid. Somebody earlier, they ask, intersectionality
Wow.
seems so obvious
I
to
need
me.
to go
Why do
into
so many
here.
people have a problem with it? What are the criticisms of it? I'm going to make a very definitive statement. There are no good criticisms of it. That's right. I'm coming out and saying it.
Oh, wait,
There are no
I actually want to
coherent
get that
criticisms
place.
of intersectionality in principle. In its application, obviously, applications can always be flawed. But in principle, the idea that understanding a person and their problems comes down to understanding the many, many ways in which they have societal advantages, disadvantages, and the ways they interact, that to me is a bulletproof theory. Really, the ways to critique it are only really to expand upon it, to make it more precise, more definitive in its prescriptions. But the fundamental principle there, I think, is just al dente. Okay? Just al dente, in my opinion. All right? What about gender abolitionism? Gender abolitionism is an ideology shared by people who believe that...
This is like some fucking crazy ass shit where they're like, gender doesn't exist. We need to abolish gender. It's fucking like a bunch of... So they want us all to be basically like non-binary.
Gender is a largely antiquated social construct, and we would all do better without it. And usually, gender abolitionists say,
And they're
this
fucking
is not something we can do
stupid.
immediately. It's more like, in 500 years, maybe people won't care as much about gender, and we'll all just stop using it as a way of describing each other. It's already happening, by the way. 100 years ago, men and women couldn't wear the same clothing outside. Men would always wear those big gray long coats and suits, and women would always
what?
wear their dresses and their frocks and their hats and stuff. But nowadays, guys, not trans, queer, non-binary, gay, whatever, but just like regular old dudes can run
Oh,
around
no, I
wearing,
didn't
like,
want to do that.
earrings,
You
like
fucking
earrings
cunt.
and like flowy shirts, and girls can wear pants. Crazy, right? You know, look at that. And before, 100 years ago, clothing dichotomies and things like that, they were a
Let's
very
do
heavy
this.
component of gender and of gendered roles
Boom.
and of gendered expectations.
Close victory.
They're already being abolished slowly.
Kill
a very
'em.
Eurocentric perspective. Yeah, I'm talking about America here. Obviously, clothing patterns vary around the world, but that trend is in action all over the world. Whether you're going to Russia or to India or to China, I bet you,
Occupy
100
sack.
years ago, men and women were encouraged to dress more distinctly than each other than they are today.
Raise.
In almost any place on earth.
I
I'd
don't
be willing
get-
to bet just pretty much anywhere that is the case. You know, Bosch, isn't that presentation and not gender itself? Gender abolitionists would argue that gender does not exist outside of presentation, expectation, and role, and that if you had none of those things, people
Move
wouldn't
to
really
and
think of themselves as a
occupy.
gender. They would think of themselves as a personality type. They would think of themselves as a combination of their personality traits, of which they would have total freedom in expressing themselves, but not as like a gender. Now, by the way, this is a highly contentious subject, and a full description of the ways in which gender and sex play into each other and how much society influences them is, well, it's very complicated. But I'll say this much: as I understand gender, gender did not exist like as we understand it 100,000 years ago. That most of the dimorphism we saw in the human species back then, or that we have anthropologically discovered, are mostly a product of biological roles and very simple proto-societal gendered roles. But as we understand it today, all of these like self-identifications with gender are a product of a really complicated set of social forces that have framed the ways in which we understand ourselves. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. But this is like mega complicated. So yeah. It's just further reading, important to read.
I should have done that
What about
before
mutualism? Mutualism is
recruited people.
I'm pretty sure this is an
That was
anarchist
stupid of me.
economic system, or it's one that's heavily associated with anarchists historically, and it's one that's I think it's very, very similar to anarcho-syndicalism in that
Fun.
it's the idea that market anarchism. It's the idea that it's through the economic production, the systems that we have today, you use those systems, you leverage them in a way to achieve equality and liberation for the working class, but you do so while maintaining the market characteristics of our society. Now, keep in mind, capitalism isn't just markets. Markets have been around forever.
I love
Envato Elements.
I love Envato Elements because not only does it inspire me to create better videos, but it also enables me to create the highest quality videos on a budget way faster. It is a one-stop shop for me as a content creator.
I can find any assets I need for my YouTube videos and client projects all in one place.
Not having to start from scratch makes it so much faster.
I can use an unlimited number of creative assets in any type of video project.
With a commercial license already good to go for a lifetime.
Jump right into creating and reach the finish line faster than ever before. Whatever picture, sound, or graphic that
I don't get why I can't build
Envato
there.
Elements has the thing to bring that vision to life and create better videos faster.
Make sure to check out Envato Elements
Okay,
and
cool.
get unlimited downloads to over 11 million professional
go.
assets.
Markets have been around for as long as human beings have been smart enough to tally debts on one another. I mean, this is a very, 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 very old idea. People have dug up like ancient stone coins from 1 billion years ago that people were using to keep track of this and that. Markets have been around forever, okay? The Greeks had markets. Oh, way back before that, too. Way, way, way back before that. Markets have always been around. So the existence of a market doesn't mean capitalism. And my argument is, this is just whatever procures the best outcomes things. If a market ends up being a system that procures the most human freedom, then that's what we defend. If decommodification ends up achieving the same, then that's what we should defend. In my opinion, I think there are ways to responsibly organize and wield market-based systems in a post-capitalist society. Though to get into the details of that, we would have to spend 30 minutes and I would have to Google some things. So let's not. Why don't you call yourself a mutualist? Because I like the term libertarian socialism. I just think it's effective. It's punchy. Gets it across. Populism. Ooh, that's an important one. Populism is an aesthetic of political organization that is dedicated to organizing the people against the elites. So populism is basically the opposite of technocracy or oligarchy. Populism is about gathering the will of the people, the interests of the people, and framing them against some group of elites. Now, populism can be applied very well. For example, pretty much every revolution and every civil rights movement has had a heavily populist element to it. The Black Panther Party, the civil rights movement, the suffragettes, the rhetoric they used, and the political organization that they engaged in leaned pretty heavily populist because in those cases, they were a group of people leveraging their power collectively against like an elite group of autocrats trying to keep them down. Okay. Am I a populist, Vosh? I think there are elements of my... Keep in mind, populism
I probably
isn't so much
would
an ideology
be,
as it is a style of delivering an ideology. At times,
I probably would be a
populist.
populist.
I'm fine with that. I think that that's perfectly defensible. There have been times where I said that I don't think right populism is a real thing, and the reason
Bro, why do you want to
is because
trade?
it seems like right populism is always self-defeating. Every time conservatives, not just conservatives, I'm sorry, but like the right broadly, wields populism, it seems to be in the service of strengthening or entrenching the elite that they're organizing against. Take, for example, Donald Trump. Yeah, we're going to drain the swamp. You know, Donald Trump, he's a maverick, and he's going to go on in there, he's going to fix D.C., and he's going to fire, you're fired, you're fired. He's going to fire all these swampy D.C. autocrats. And then what happened? Not only did Donald Trump get in bed immediately with all of the Wall Street contractors and old school politicians that he complained about beforehand, he then hired, he worked with them on his campaign, he pardoned dozens of corrupt officials right before his presidential term ended. He did everything directly opposite to what a person draining the swamp would want. But do his fans care? No. No, they don't. No, they don't. The people who support Donald Trump continue to use populist rhetoric in the service of advocating for an explicitly anti-populist agenda. So it's not so much that right populism doesn't exist, it's that right populism doesn't lead to the outcomes populists should probably want. Accelerationism. Ooh, that's a big one.
Accelerationism can be right-wing or left-wing accelerationism. It's basically where you want to step on the foot of capitalism by like deregulation and everything so that you can get to whatever form you want. So like left-wing accelerationism would think that you accelerate capitalism until it fails, and then you would get your communist society. Right-wing capitalism, right-wing accelerationism is basically just accelerate capitalism, and then you get like a bunch of cool AI, that type of shit. Both are cringe.
Is a radical ideology, mostly used on the left, but not always. Sometimes it's used by people on the right.
Well, like, Nick Land is a right-wing accelerationist. He's one of the founders of accelerationism. He was originally a left-wing accelerationist, but now he's a right-wing accelerationist.
And the idea behind accelerationism is that the best way to achieve the society that you want is to accelerate the contradictions within the current one. So an accelerationist socialist might say, hey, capitalism is cringe. The best way to get rid of it and to establish socialism is not to reform and fix and patch up the systems today and slowly elect people to slowly go about it, this change and that. No.
Cringe.
An accelerationist would say, this capitalist economy needs to be driven into the ground. It just needs to be pile driven into the dirt. Gotta push it right down. It needs to blow up. We need to push all the problems with this country to their breaking point until they explode, and then we will be the ones to pick up the pieces. Now, I have many criticisms of accelerationism generally. I think that it's a very privileged idea
Accelerationism is
because
fucking
the
cringe as
damage to
shit.
society will disproportionately affect many marginalized groups. And I also think it's ineffective because at the moment, certainly in America with the left wing, we don't have the power or numbers to pick up any pieces after the fact.
It's basically a means to a utopian society, which there's no such thing as a utopian society. I guess we can do this agreement.
We don't have that leverage. So in reality, we'd be tanking a system. Well, why? In my experience, out of anger. I think that a lot of accelerationists say what they say and want what they want because they dislike the system and want to see it burn, but they're not so concerned with the logistical challenges of fixing things up afterwards. The only, caveat that I would add to this is that I like, as Marx did, economic accelerationism. Like, for example, a general strike. What is a general strike? A general strike is a way of exacerbating the existing contradictions within an economic system. You gather the working class together and you get them to essentially shut down economic production in an attempt to raise the stakes. That's what accelerationism does. It raises the stakes. The economy gets worse while everyone generally strikes, but you're towing closer to the line. In my belief, this is an acceptable kind of micro-accelerationism because it's effective in achieving its stated goals. General strikes do tend to produce conciliatory policy to the working class. It tends to lead to things going in their favor, unless they get airstriked or killed by the Pinkertons or whatever, you know. So it tends to have favorable outcomes. So that's something that I'm generally okay with. What is an example of right-wing accelerationism? I would argue that the obstructionist behavior of Mitch McConnell is a kind of right-wing accelerationism. Mitch McConnell, for the years that he ran the Senate, just flat out did not allow necessary legislation to be tabled, even be voted upon, making the country demonstrably worse. To what end? Well, the collapse of our government favors the right because they're in the best position to hop up on board afterwards. I would argue that is a kind of right accelerationism. Does that make sense? There are many kinds, possibly, but what is a left con? A left communist is, there's a stereotype of them in the lefty communities that they're like complaining do-gooders that do absolutely nothing but like purity test other lefties. Left comms tend to be progressive communists who are opposed to many existing types of quote-unquote socialist organization because they're not good enough or because they're reactionary. I think they tend to be pretty cool. People lump me in with left comms pretty often. What's funny is that left comms were the ones Lenin was criticizing when he wrote like Left Communism and Infantile Disorder, but I've since used that essay to attack the types of people who also attack left communists. So
I actually don't know about this essay.
I wouldn't worry too much.
Steel technology.
Orders, Major. Obtain safe.
Much about the million billion lefty terms out there, by the way. It sounds like you just described woke scolds. Nah, when I say woke scolds, that's not a worthwhile term. When I describe woke
I've
scolds,
never heard of a woke scold. Ooh, shouldn't have done that. That was bad idea, Jace. Bad idea. I'm just gonna auto-resolve because obviously that was fucking stupid. I can't believe that. I thought that that it was my other guy who I was gonna have to fight with. Damn it. I guess we'll do that.
Talk about like progressives who are hyper fixated on purity testing and maintaining the broader progressive community as some kind of like social space where admission is determined by whether or not they think you'd be a cool person to be around, rather than it being like a broad shared political goal and movement that we all have an interest in strengthening and being a part of. It's basically me saying SJWs without me actually saying SJWs, and I'll keep doing that. How does a socialist society decommodify without becoming a command economy? A decentralized economic system. Without having market incentives and without having a single, like, commanding economic authority, you can still have a broadly decentralized system of people who propose and organize the production and distribution of resources. So rather than it being like the party elites of the Kremlin doing everything, it's like every community has designated officials who are elected in, who like organize the needs of their community to determine what is needed and where it needs to go. You never explained rainbow capitalism. You're completely right. Rainbow capitalism is a derogatory
These are
term
fucking
usually used to
faggots.
criticize corporations for optically engaging in progressive language without substantively supporting the aforementioned groups. So
oh no, it's not
one
faggots.
good example of like rainbow capitalism would be like Pride Month. All these corporations come out with prepared messages on how valuable diversity is to them. Disney comes out with their little like rainbow flag with Mickey Mouse running across it. But Disney also cuts LGBT scenes from their shows, censors people of color and queer people from broadcasts and releases abroad, and also is fairly conservative when it comes to the depiction of queer people and non-traditional like family relations in the media they show here, you know? In fact, just today, I think, Disney has said that Loki is now like gender non-conforming, I think, or was it like agender? What was the term that Disney used to describe Loki? The news article was like Loki gender fluid. The news article said Disney is further
This is
diversifying
fucking
their
gay.
cast by making Loki gender fluid. Loki was gender fluid 1,000 years ago. That's
damn.
not new. That's not a new thing, okay? He already was. They
Yeah,
took
I
a
guess
gender
that
fluid
is
character,
true.
And then they
I guess that is true that he was that a long time ago. Like even in like the like Nordic mythology, he was, I guess. Because there's one story about how the ice, like why the fuck can't why can't I think of the name of them? Fuck. The ice, like elves, I think. Maybe it's ice elves? Whatever the fuck they're called. We're making a... We're making a wall, and they had this giant horse that they were doing to do it, that they were using to do it. So they had Loki turn into a woman horse and get fucked by the other giant horse. So, yeah, he is right that Loki is originally fucking gender fluid, which is gay as fuck, but yeah. I guess he's right.
It made him presumptively cis in the adaptations. And now that it's something that they can get away with, they'll say that he's gender fluid. That's rainbow capitalism. He already was gender fluid, but now it's like, oh,
I
like,
can't
look
move
around,
this
it's safer,
guy.
no cars coming either way. You haven't done fascism yet? Oh my god, you haven't. That's right. So, fascism.
Fascism is really fucking hard to explain. Because everyone has a different term for what fascism is. I would just, if you really want to know what fascism is, I would just read Doctrine of Fascism by Mussolini. That's the best way that you could probably figure out what fascism is. He's going to say that it's something other than what it fucking is. So...
is a little bit difficult
That's
to
all
describe
I
for
know.
me personally, because the definition that I am most familiar with and the one that I enjoy the most is from Umberto Eco. This is a definition that anybody who's watched my stream for any length of time is probably familiar with. It is a compilation of 14 points that he says describe Ur-fascism. Now, I could go over all of these and it would take a little while, but I'm going to say this generally, okay? This is sort of a general statement that I'm going to make for the purpose of being concise, okay? When I think of fascism, I don't think of governments. I think of social trends in broader communities, warning signs that you find, an indication that a community or a movement is leaning in a fascistic direction, okay? Does that make sense? So think of it a little bit like a diagnosis of a mental illness, which is a very apt comparison, okay? When you're diagnosing a mental illness, you can't just, for the most part, a doctor can't just like hear like 2 lines from their patient and check it off and go like, oh yeah, that's that.
I think I'm gonna attack
It's usually
these
more complicated.
guys.
You have to dig into the thoughts and the patterns and the behaviors and the beliefs of the person you're talking to really understand the diagnosis. So when it comes to fascism, okay, here are some broader trends to look out for, okay?
What the
Think
fuck?
of it as political
Where did this thing come
advocacy
from?
defined by some of these ideas. And I'm just going to list it off, okay? A worship of tradition and a rejection of modernism, i.e. we must return to the past.
What?
Modern society is degenerate. It is corrupting us. We need to return to the old ways. A promotion of
this is
action
mine.
and advocacy
I was just
over thought.
confused.
Don't engage in introspection. Act. Fight. Fight for what is yours. But don't think about it. Thinking is emasculating. An obsession with right think and wrong think. If you disagree, this isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's treason. Disagreeing in a fascist society or with fascists means that you are an enemy to the people with whom you disagree. Think, by the way, of the language used in the fundraising emails the Trump campaign continues to send out. Hey, I notice you haven't donated in 90 days. If you don't donate soon, I'm going to be forced to tell our team that you've joined the no-good commie Democrats. I'm actually quoting. I'm pretty sure I'm like quoting word for word their fundraiser emails here. If you don't side with us, you're the enemy. That's a big one for fascism. A fear of difference is a key one as well, which appeals to the same thing. An appeal to social frustration. That's a big one too. You have to take this latent feeling that something is wrong. Often it's economic frustration. That happened here in America today among Trump voters. It happened in the Weimar Republic and the mega inflation they experienced after World War I.
We are hard-working Americans.
This is what's important to us.
Options for...
Yeah, see, I completely disagree with what he says fascism is.
But it's also social frustration. One of the social frustrations that fascists in America appeal to the most is the fear that white straight men are having their rights removed.
Yeah, I'll get $300.
You see that a lot? Now people are being anti-white. Now people are being anti-men. Now people are being anti-straight. You all these things. These are the last groups you can attack these days, you know? Or the only groups that you can attack still. It's, you know, that sort of thing. A social frustration. Okay? We're almost done now. An obsession with a plot. There's always a story. Some enemy trying to destroy us. And that enemy is both strong and weak. Depending on the rhetorical framing, that enemy can be weak, cowardly, effeminate, easy to destroy, or overwhelming and unstoppable. Think of how conservatives talk about Antifa. What is Antifa? Is it a group of thin-necked 19-year-old soy boys who turn over trash cans? Or is it a group of militant agitators who travel from protest to protest as part of a nefarious plot to destroy America? Well, depending on when you ask them, they're going to say it's either or the other. To wrap it up, keep an eye out for anti-pacifism, the idea that you are a traitor if you do not wish to engage in violence. You saw this during the January...
It's both, because I would say that the people who are like the militant group are using these soy boys as a pawn, basically. Ooh. What is this? I'm just gonna recruit with this, dude. Exit. What is this? So what it...
6 Capitol riots, remember? Republican officials who were not publicly backing the attack on the Capitol were called traitors, and they called for their hanging. Everyone is educated to become a hero. This one is a little bit more esoteric, but think of it like this. Heroism is incredibly important to the fascist, because the fascist is an authoritarian, usually highly deferential to the state. A hero, in the fascist context, is a person willing to die for that state, or for the race, or for the vote, or for the people, or whatever. The hero is a person willing to give their life. Do you know how many 15, 16, 17-year-old German boys died on the front lines when the Nazis ran out of adult soldiers? Quite a few. And they were told, since they were old enough to understand, since they were old enough to hear German, that one day they might be called upon to die in service of the country, and that it was their responsibility, and that they would die a hero. The cult of heroism is a big, big component of fascism, as is an obsession with machismo and weaponry. I think that speaks to itself. Selective populism, that is to say, right populism. Yeah, we need to gang up on the elites. And by we, I mean the white, straight, cisgender working class who votes Republican. You know, we are anti-elite, except, I mean, a very small fragment of the population, you know, proportional to the majority against the elites. And the last one is newspeak. And this is a big one. Remember the alternative facts meme? Fascism demands its advocates invent new terms whose job it is to obfuscate the meaning of the ideas being expressed. This is a fairly common one for authoritarian governments in general. It's played up in 1984, which is why newspeak is the term being used here by Umberto Eco. You take terms that are sinister and you recode them, smash them down, chop off ends of words and mix them together into some sort of Frankenstein until you have a completely new lexicon. Have you ever taken a look at a far-right, like, pro-Trump board, like the Donald back before it got nuked? Oh my god, these people were barely speaking English, okay? They were barely speaking English. They were looking through it. The jargon that they used was just... And there was a purpose to it as well. Is it because they're cowards or what? It's a part of cult-like behavior. If you get people who are part of an extremist crowd to speak a unique language it becomes easier for them to speak with the in crowd and harder for them to speak to people outside of that crowd. They begin to use terms and express ideas insular that are less and less understandable to the average person, until eventually their social circle is comprised almost exclusively of people who agree with them politically. Like this chat does. You could argue that Twitch memes and like Twitch emote speak is a kind of newspeak, but it's not a politically biased kind of newspeak. It's newspeak that is designed to accommodate a technological innovation more so than it is newspeak designed to truncate thought and create insular social political communities. Does that make sense? The reason why I spent so much time with this definition is because there's something that makes fascism unique. Most of the terms that we've described today were described by academics. They were constructed as a way of describing sets of ideas. Sometimes the words came about before the ideas were really even implemented. But in the case of fascism, I find it is most useful to think of it as a broad collection of social pathogens, types of behavior, sociological and psychological, that are destructive to human organized society, that emerge in certain conditions and tend to coexist. They develop and express themselves more effectively in tandem with one another. Like a social pathogen, basically, a virus. So, I know that sounds kind of larby, but I really do think that best explains the history of fascism. And if you look, by the way, at the history of fascism in this country and in others, then you'll find, I think that's a fairly accurate example of how it emerges. It's not like neoliberalism. There is no neoliberal contagion that spreads from social movement to social movement with a bunch of vaguely interconnected ideas and rhetorical styles that merge together. No, neoliberalism is a fairly understandable economic and political framework that you can describe. Fascism is more complicated, so I use a broad definition. And if we're trying to determine whether or not something or someone is fascist, the best thing that you can do is look at their behavior, look at their language, and then try to find a way to see how well it matches onto these patterns. Almost every person and every political group is going to adhere to at least a few of these terms, because they're so broad. That's why you can't just think of it as like a checklist. You have to think of it like a set of warning signs. Have you ever seen those like those warning signs like
those guys
if 10 or more of these apply to you, you may have depression? And one of them is like sleeps in late. If you sleep in late, that does not mean you have depression inherently. That's not like a one-to-one thing, you know? But it can contribute to a broader self-understanding, you know? Do you find yourself lolling in and out of coherence sometimes, like you're dissociating a little bit? That doesn't necessarily mean you're depressed, but it could mean it. And you have to look at
Savings are brewing at Butte Auto's Butte Subaru. Right now, get 0.9% APR for 72 months on the 2023 Solterra. Find your next Subaru at Butte Subaru today.
These all together and think like, okay, how much does this describe me? How much does this describe us? That's how I like to think of fascism, in my opinion. Personally. There are many other definitions of fascism, but I think the ones here probably lend the most utility in description. Oh, somebody mentioned eco-fascism, by the way. Eco-fascism doesn't actually mean ecological fascism. Eco-fascism means attempting to solve climate-related issues by engaging in punitive measures against marginalized populations. So, eco-fascists might say, wow, the world is going to be on fire soon. There are too many humans. We need to encourage lower birth rates in African countries. This often goes alongside, like, advocacy for sustainable populations, which, by the way, I think overpopulation is a widely overstated problem. But you see this a lot from isolationists and nationalists as well. Hey, is America really the problem with climate change? We've only got 300 million people here. There are going to be billions of people in Southeast Asia, in Africa, what have you. Clearly, they're the ones who are the problem. We need fewer of them. It's essentially a way of justifying social Darwinism through the framework of ecological consciousness, which is, well, not great. There are people who are concerned with overpopulation in ways that sound eco-fascist. I don't think it's always an indicator that you're eco-fascist. It's just like, well, it's warning signs, you know? Would a simpler definition of fascism be a rejection of Enlightenment values? Socialists reject some Enlightenment values, like laissez-faire capitalism. But yes, fascists are always, almost always anti-modernist. But that was the first tendency that I linked there. Again, there's so much that plays into it, you know? What is anti-fascism? Being anti-fascist. Pretty much does it. What is atomization? Atomization is a term often used in Marxian analysis.
I've never heard of atomization.
Is society is straining down the social structures until every individual is wholly and utterly on their own. Tribal societies were incredibly communal, incredibly interdependent, incredibly collectively bound. An atomized society is an alienated society. You don't just have individualism, because I believe heavily in individualism. You have an elimination of social cohesion to the point where people truly feel alone. So it's not just individual rights. It's our economy, our family structures, our urban engineering, our workplaces, our schooling, all of it leaves us feeling so empty because nobody is directly dependent upon or tied to anyone else. At your workplace, you're just a cog in the machine, man. You can be replaced. In the educational system, you're just one person among millions being crammed through a monotonous and highly reductive educational process. Your housing, you live in a suburban housing unit where there is 30 feet between you and the next house, and you don't know your neighbors, and you never need to know your neighbors. You know why? Because you don't need a babysitter. You can call a service for that. There is an economic incentive to avoid ever interacting with the people around you. Do you need like somebody to watch your dogs? There's a system for that. You can call somebody on your phone. You never ever need to know your neighbors. You never need to get to work know your coworkers because your manager tells you that you shouldn't be talking to them on the job. You should focus on the work that you're doing. In your schooling, people are so saddled with work and so removed from the actual practical consequences of the classwork they receive, they don't actually socialize or develop formative social bonds. This is atomization. It is one of the central Marxian critiques of modern liberal society. It is largely an economic critique. You become atomized through your alienation from the fruits of your labor, but it applies to many social trends. What is vanguardism? Vanguardism is the belief that the way to secure a socialist society is through a revolution where a vanguard, a group of educated, essentially, let's be real, elites, who advocate on behalf of the interests of the working class, seize power and then take the state apparatus and twist it into something that is beneficial for all. They use it to force the state apparatus into the confines of a proletarian state. Mixed results on that. What about class reductionism? Ooh, the shoe's still here? Ha! So class reductionism is a very, very cringe ideological tendency. It is something generally done by people on the left, and it is the idea that fundamentally, issues like sexism and racism and transphobia and what have you are subservient to class divides. That at the end of it all, economic divides are the principal issues here, and that focusing on or advocating for racial or gender or trans or whatever else kind of issues is really a distraction from the principal matter of class advocacy. So this is a fundamental rejection of intersectionality. Remember what we talked about with that? Rather than believing we need to look at all of these interconnected systems, instead we push them all to the side and we focus on one. Now, I do believe that class issues are probably, in a capitalist system at least, the most pressing, generally, you know? Because in my opinion, and I think most people would agree with this, I would rather be a billionaire black guy than a poverty-stricken white guy. Class issues are all-consuming. But that doesn't mean the other issues don't exist. Is Glenn Greenwald a class reductionist? Glenn Greenwald is a Republican. Glenn Greenwald used to be a class reductionist. Now he is just a conservative. I remember that I made a comment about class reductionism on Twitter like 2 years ago, and he quote tweeted me saying there was basically no such thing. And now he is basically he's like a clown running around making fun of the type of person who I would have criticized in the past for that type of behavior. So he also calls me a pedophile on Twitter sometimes. He was defending Fox News. Did you see that? He called Tucker Carlson a socialist. Seriously. All right. Do we have any other? Nazgul vortex. I've already described what I consider a Nazgul to be. Quick refresher. A Nazgul is a Nazgul colloquially basically just means like a socialist Nazi or a person who believes what Nazis believe, but they also advocate for a proletarian revolution and for the abolition of class society. So the Nazgul vortex is a hypothetical situation that I like to talk about. It's a term that people use outside of my community now, which is very strange to me, but I guess we'll roll with it. The Nazgul vortex basically means I worry that we're falling into a place in this country where there are people who want far-right politics, and they will argue to left-leaning people that the only way for them to achieve their left-leaning goals is to abandon progressivism and hurtle down to the right wing. There are people who engage in this behavior to varying extents, but the easiest way to explain it would be the kinds of people who are on the left but still like Tucker Carlson. So Tucker Carlson's segments, his shows, are very far-right in terms of social issues. But in terms of how he talks about class, he will often say, like, oh, like, there are elites and there are, like, the anti-workers in this country, and if we all really cared, we should get together and deal with this rising global inequality, well, not global, this rising class inequality, that kind of thing, Now, Tucker Carlson is completely full of it. He doesn't actually care about class rights or anything along those lines. But people are amicable to this argument, and there are a lot of people who are under the impression that advocating for social progressivism is like this cringe, liberal, like, pro-corporatist position that's a deviation from real, like, leftist advocacy, which is essentially argue for class emancipation through a right-wing framework. Does this make any sense? Basically, they're basically like an increasing number of people who are falling further and further to the right in an attempt to achieve ostensibly left-wing goals, class emancipation. The Nazgul vortex. And more people are going to, like, swirl down towards this. It's very heavily in line with what I describe class reductionism to be. What is identity politics? Identity politics is a term people broadly use to refer to intersectional concerns that exist outside class. Race, gender, nationality, all stuff like this. Identity politics. I think it's a misnomer. I think that what we call identity politics are also class-based and materially relevant, and that class is to an extent identity-based. So I think that it's not as segmented, as some people say it is. What is liberal idpol? Liberal idpol is a generally derogatory term that people use to describe either insincere or, what would you say, hollow progressive advocacy. The most common liberal idpol meme is like female drone pilot. You have a fundamentally unethical system, drone strikes in foreign countries. How do we make this progressive? Well, we have a woman piloting it, you know? It's basically a way of criticizing liberals for grasping the aesthetic of progressivism without meaningfully effective progressive change. Also, whenever anybody mentions it, it's you post the soy face, you know? Please explain the filibuster. We're talking about political concepts, not like specific laws in the American government. What is a blue dog Democrat? It's an old term. It's not really used that much anymore, but it's usually used to refer to like not super progressive, more conservative-leaning Democrats who were heavy on union rights back in the day. So they voted Democrat out of like class issues, not because they were necessarily progressive. Nowadays, that term isn't really that relevant, I don't think. I mean, it's not really used that often. What is neo-Nazism? Nazism, but new. What is dialectical materialism? Dialectical materialism is a Marxian revamp of a Hegelian concept called, well,
I mean, I'm already fighting these
the
guys,
dialectic
so
is
yeah.
the idea that you can improve a concept, an idea, by resolving it in a dialectical way. That is to say, a person provides a thesis, an idea,
What is this
and you have a
one?
counter thesis, the counter argument, and then by smashing these two together, idea and counter, the antagonisms
Dialectical
are resolved
materialism.
or at least addressed. And you
I know what
What is
materialism
dialectical materialism?
is, but I don't know what dialectical materialism is.
Materialism is a Marxian revamp of a Hegelian concept called, well, the dialectic. The dialectic is the idea that you can improve a concept, an idea, by resolving it in a dialectical way. That is to say, a person provides a thesis, an idea, and you have a counter thesis, the counter argument, and then by smashing these two together, idea and counter, the antagonisms are resolved, or at least addressed, and you arrive at a synthesis. Basically, you have a concept, and it's challenged, and that challenge begets an improvement to the original idea. Marx said this works in a material sense too, not just on ideas. So dialectical materialism is the idea that social progress is driven by the antagonisms between different classes and people of different material interests clashing against each other to resolve contradictions and antagonisms in these ideas, and then eventually arrive at some kind of synthesis. Like how the contradictions in feudal society led to the Enlightenment and the society in which we live today, if that makes any sense. Explain the culture war. The culture war is what I rather derogatorily refer to as this ongoing, meaningless, worthless engagement in these news stories and these tangentially relevant ideas that have nothing to do with most people's actual day-to-day lives, but people obsess over them. This insane, like for example, like Republicans day to day, what do they obsess over? Trans women and women's sports. How is this? I mean, even if you want to talk the nuance on this is like the most insanely marginal. This is like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the population is affected by this. But the president will talk about it. People will pass federal laws on these ideas. The culture war is a way of distracting people from real ideas and real policies that really affect their lives by jangling keys in front of their faces. Hey, don't focus on real stuff that actually means anything. Focus on this
I do
inflammatory
see
news story
some
about a building getting
some
burnt.
things of the cultural wars that are cringe, but like trans rights, I do think that we need to fight against that.
During a BLM protest and spend 6 months having your entire set of ideas about racial politics being decided by this one protest. Hey. That's the culture war. It's not good. You'll find that a lot of my channel is engaging in the culture war only to pull back and say, why don't we focus on something more important? I feel it's an effective way to bring people in. Could you explain the term cultural Marxism? Cultural Marxism is a revamp of an old anti-Semitic conspiracy theory called cultural Bolshevism. Basically, it was the idea that academia and broader society are being infiltrated by Jewish leftists
Jews.
and that they are going to destroy white people or whatever. It was called
So
cultural
true.
Bolshevism in Nazi Germany. Today it's called cultural Marxism. It's really that simple. Now, people who talk about cultural Marxism don't usually say it's like Jewish people. They usually say it's actually a group of economic elites with a specific hatred of white people, and they're using a far-left Marxist idea.
Goya is not just white people. Goya is everyone except for Jews. So
ideas to disseminate far-left ideology, which is leading to immigration and the replacement of the white man by foreigners and brown and black people, and the supplant. It's like they do everything but say Jewish people. You see this in Jordan Peterson's lectures as well. It's basically that. Like it's this broad conspiracy, and yeah, pretty dumb. Fake news versus manufactured consent. Fake news is just like a buzzword people use to refer to, I mean, I guess fake news, but Trump voters mean it to mean anything that doesn't make Trump look good. That's just kind of a buzzword, right? But manufactured consent is a concept that's mostly espoused by people who like Chomsky. And I like Chomsky. Manufactured consent is the idea that if you control the airwaves, if you control media, if you control what's said publicly, if you can guide the public discourse, you have the ability to manufacture, to construct the
manufactured consent. He is manufactured consent, bro.
people who listen to you. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that in 6 months, people are going to vote on a referendum in the United Kingdom on whether or not to do Brexit, okay? Now, whether or not they vote leave or no leave on that referendum is entirely up to them. Nobody is going to force any individual to make any given choice. But if you control the airwaves, you can spend 6 months disseminating BS propaganda on how the EU bleeds the UK dry and how $18 gazillion could otherwise be spent on the NHS were it not going to save poor children in Lithuania. You'll find that as a product of your propagandizing, people are far, far more likely to vote in favor of leave. Yes, this is exactly what happened, by the way. They're far more likely to vote in favor of leave. You have manufactured consent. You have gotten people to consent to something which they otherwise would not have done so to.
In Albion, no matter where you go or what you do, your mount will accompany you on your journey. Perhaps you'll pick the ox, a merchant's best friend. It can carry anything you throw at it. Anything. Okay, maybe...
By manipulating the information they were presented. Like the Iraq War. Yes, like the Iraq War. 100%. What is tokenism? Tokenism is the idea that
using
people
black
who are part
people
of a minority group can either use or have their identities be used for the purposes of giving an informed opinion on a subject.
How did I get to where I was
tokenism
losing?
is essentially like, I'm the black guy of this group, and because of that, I get to do X. Most commonly, tokens are used by conservative political groups to justify reactionary policies by having the victims of those policies advocate in their favor. For example, getting like Blair White, a trans woman, advocate for transphobia, it's harder to argue against than if it was like a cis dude arguing for transphobia, because they get to throw up all this, oh, well, you would disagree with a trans woman on this, etc., etc. A token doesn't have to be somebody who deliberately weaponizes that tendency, though. A token can also be something cynically evoked by an institution in order to assuage criticisms of bigotry. Remember how at the RNC they busted out like 20 black Republicans, aka every black Republican? They did that in large part because after a whole year of demonizing Black Lives Matter, they wanted to rope in the black people that they could with the message that they're not anti-black, they're just anti-black civil rights movement. You know? It's a form of tokenization. And by the way, all groups do that to some extent or another. It's not something exclusively done by reactionary groups. It's just a thing that tends to happen. Some people do this more maliciously than others. What is egoism? As I understand it, it's a broad set of...
Egoism is by, what's his name? Max... Oh, fuck, why can't I think of his name? Max Street... it's basically do whatever the fuck you want.
Positions which orient the self and self-interest as like the principal driving force of human behavior, both descriptively and prescriptively. But I don't know enough about it to make any strong statements on it. It's a little bit beyond me, to be honest. Oh, MLs. So I've been criticized for this in the past, but Marxism-Leninism, which is a common ideology for people on the left, is something that I don't think very favorably of, in large part because it seems like Marxism-Leninism doesn't actually mean anything. It's just a way of defending, like, state behavior. It seems like you hear so often this like socialism with X characteristics, and what it usually boils down to is we're going to adopt the aesthetics of socialism, but all of our meaningful political advocacy is going to be dedicated to defending the state, state power, and the political systems in our state that have control. Like, I so rarely hear MLs talk about workers, which is really, really telling to me. And if you look at the history of Marxism-Leninism, by the way, it was predominantly used as an ideological synthesis in the Stalin regime. Not by Lenin, but by Stalin and by his cohorts, as a way of solidifying an ideology that could be used to defend the state. And that's what MLism was for Stalin. It was basically, you know, everything, comrade, that we do is in line with the immortal scientific interests of the dialectic analysis of Lenin and Marx. Now, watch as I make your neighbors disappear. That kind of stuff, you know? I don't think that Marxism-Leninism has really strong, consistent definitions at all. Leninism can, 100%. And there are elements of Marxism-Leninism that I think are defensible in some cases, but I don't think that the broader ideology really means that much other than defending whatever services the state we like at the time, you know? And I don't think that is very good. I think that is very, very bad. What is black nationalism? This is another one of those definitions where, depending on how good faith the person you're talking to is, you might get very different answers. Black nationalism is the idea that we should promote the economic and political independence for black people in this country. Basically, you know, Black Wall Street, like the Tulsa massacre, like that, before the massacre happened, you know? The idea that they should make an effort to consolidate their political power and resources to not let it all get bled away by the autocratic establishment. There are some people who use the term black nationalist to refer to what I would call a black separatist, which are people who want to form black ethno-states, people who want all the black people to leave America, people who want to, you know, like form another country, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. That type of behavior I don't think is very productive. Okay, I feel like we've done a lot of definitions today. I feel like we've done many, many definitions. I also feel like there's a decent probability that people are going to be angry at me because by way of describing like 60 things in one uninterrupted stream, we're probably going to give some rather simplistic definitions for a few of these. Most of what people are asking for here are things that have already been covered. Yeah, it looks like things have pretty much been covered. Yeah, okay. I think that things have pretty much been covered. Wow, that's nice. Okay, a final cap off on all of this is that a reminder that political definitions are always going to be variable and contextual, meaning that the use of those terms is going to vary depending on the ways in which they're being used, who's using them, how honest the people using them are being, and other conditions like that. So don't think of these as like one-off definitions that are objectively and unilaterally correct. Think of them as like
Where did all these guys come from?
You understand what the hell people mean when they say X or when they say Y, you know? So just keep that in mind. Yeah, with all that said, if you have any problem with any definitions that I've listed out here, please feel free to angrily email me, okay?
Another weekend in London, another stunning showcase for diversity being our greatest strength.
Jeez, that guy talks too fast for...
I'm so fat.
Brendan, you're not fat. It's the shirt. Look at Nate. His true classic is tight around the chest.
Well, folks, if there's one group of people you should learn to look out for when it comes to morality, people you should respect, it is, of course, Hollywood celebrities. So morons in Hollywood. All the best people. All of them. All of your moral exemplars. Everybody from Alyssa Milano, who took a break from standing for abortion to stand with terrorists. Apparently she likes dead babies across the board. So you got Alyssa Milano. You have David Cross. You have people like Hassan Minhaj, recently spotted falsifying many of his personal stories about American anti-Arab sentiment. Jeremy Strong, who is so far up his own rear that he has become totally familiar with his own colon. Kristen Stewart McLemore. Mark Ruffalo, who, and by the way, I would trade any of these people for any of the hostages in Gaza right now. And we'll see how they enjoy it over there. Ryan Coogler, the director of Black Panther. Susan Sarandon, no shock there. Rooney Mara. John Stewart, who's just a despicable human being. Wanda Sykes, Rosario Dawson, Kate Blanchett, Andrew Garfield, Mahershala Ali, America Ferrera, recently the star of Barbie. Joaquin Phoenix, all these people signed a letter. And what does the letter say? The letter says that Israel must stop. It must stop. You must leave the terrorists in place. They wrote a letter to the president. Quote, "Dear President, we come together as artists and advocates, but most importantly as human beings, witnessing the devastating loss of lives and unfolding horrors in Israel and Palestine. We ask that as President of the United States, you call for an immediate de-escalation and ceasefire in Gaza and Israel before another life is lost." There is zero mention in this entire letter of Hamas. There is zero mention of what led off this conflict. This is the way, by the way, that moral morons do what they do. What they do is they just ignore the beginning of every war. It's really, it's a fun way to, again, escape moral culpability and the fact that you, in fact, are a fellow traveler with Hamas to do all of this stuff. It makes it really easy. You just ignore what started the whole thing. They've been doing this for 20 years. Hamas fires a bunch of rockets at Israeli civilian centers. Israel retaliates. They go, the violence must stop. It's like, well, what led to the violence? If you can ignore it, then you can just move right back into that warm bath of moral equivalence. But here's the reality. The moral equivalence doesn't exist, and guess what? Reality is going to hit you directly in the face if you continue with this nonsense. So the West has a choice. They can either wake up or they can continue to facilitate moral idiocy in the name of tolerance. It's not just going to be Jews who pay the price for that one, by the way. I want to talk to you about DailyWare's most trusted privacy partner and premier sponsor of the show, ExpressVPN. You've heard me talk about how important it is to have a VPN to protect your online privacy. But choosing a VPN you trust is equally as lower productivity. I mean, I know that because sometimes I don't get the sleep that I need. I'm sure that that's true for a lot of our listeners as well. Sleep is the foundation of our mental and physical health and performance. Having a consistent nighttime routine is non-negotiable. If you are struggling with sleep, you need to check out Beam. Beam's top-selling Beam Dream has a new formula. Dream contains a powerful all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, and apigenin to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. Just mix Beam Dream into hot water or milk, stir or froth, and enjoy before bedtime. Today, my listeners get a special discount on Beam Dream Powder, their best-selling healthy hot cocoa for sleep with no added sugar. Now available in delicious flavors like cinnamon cocoa, chocolate peanut butter, and mint chip. Better sleep has never tasted better. Our office is more energetic. A bunch of people at the office have been using Beam Dream. You can do the same if you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder. Get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/Ben. Use code Ben at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/Ben. Use code Ben for up to 40% off. That's shopbeam.com/Ben. Use code Ben for up to 40% off. The United States is sort of sending a little bit of mixed signals. So Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, he said we're concerned at the possibility the Iranian proxies are going to escalate the war against the United States. Well, here's the reality. They should be a lot more worried about escalating the war against the United States than we should be worried about them escalating the war against us. And just to be perfectly frank about this, if they fire on American warships, everyone in Hezbollah will be dead. You know, the United States is not a power to be trifled with. And the fact that we are constantly kind of pussyfooting around this, like, oh, well, you know, we're worried about Iranian proxies escalating against us. They should be a lot more worried about us escalating against them, considering the United States military is the most powerful fighting force in the history of the world, bar none. We have a military budget that is the rest of the world combined times 2. So, if Hezbollah decides that they want to get it on, by the way, this is the message we should be conveying to them. It's like, you want to do this? Do you really want to cross that line? Do you really want to do that? Because it will be a giant's foot against a mosquito, man. Here's Tony Blinken, though. Again, the mixed signals here are pretty remarkable.
Tension is very high in the region. Are you changing your security posture? Are you pulling any U.S. personnel out of the area?
Margaret, we are concerned at the possibility of Iranian proxies escalating their attacks against our own personnel, our own people. We're taking every measure to make sure that we can defend them and, if necessary, respond decisively.
So, I mean, I'm glad if necessary response. Again, this is very easy. The President of the United States, in his last speech, he should have said, we don't want you to escalate. You should not want you to escalate, because if you escalate, you will be dead. I mean, that is how it works in the Middle East. And pretending otherwise is really, really, really done. By the way, Israel is saying some of that sort of stuff. So Nir Barkat, who is a member of the government right now, he's Israel's Minister of the Economy, he warned Iran that if they get directly involved, Israel will, quote, cut the head of the snake off, which is what Israel has to convey. If they don't convey that, then Iran will, in fact, get in. And it is worthwhile noting here that there is, in fact, a common interest not necessarily among Iran, but even among Iran and not escalating this thing. Right now, the math is this. Iran has a bunch of proxies. Those proxies include the Houthis in Yemen, they include Hezbollah in the north of Israel, they include the Syrian government, they include the Lebanese regime, which is Hezbollah, and they include Hamas. Hamas was not supposed to succeed this way. The entire goal of this terrorist attack was probably to kill 50 Jews and kidnap 5, and instead it killed 1,500 Jews and kidnapped 200. And because of that, Hamas is now in existential danger. And so Iran would prefer not to have the knight on its chessboard knocked off the chessboard, but that is what's going to happen. And so Iran now has to consider whether it prefers to lose its knight in the Gaza Strip plus another knight in northern Israel/southern Lebanon in Hezbollah, because if it escalates, that's where this is going, or whether it just concedes the loss. So they're desperately trying to spin their way out of Hamas losing control of the Gaza Strip, and the only question is whether the West is going to prevent Israel from doing what it needs to do in the Gaza Strip. I have faith that the United States is not going to do that, because again, I think everybody has an interest in seeing Hamas fall, including, by the way, Egypt. How do you know this? Because actually, over the weekend, the IDF accidentally hit an Egyptian outpost, and Egypt immediately said, we get it, it happens, fog of war. So for all the talk about how the entire Arab world is united against Israel, that's not really true. Basically, you have the Iranian proxies who are united against Israel, and the Sunnis who are like, if Hamas gets taken out, we can't say that we're happy about it, but we're pretty happy about it. We're pretty much okay with all of that. The United States is seeking to buy another way, which is buy off Hamas, right? Try and pay off these guys. Now, this is a strategy that is doomed to failure. It's a very dumb strategy. You cannot buy off Iran. You cannot buy off Hamas. You'll be giving them money, and they will use it for the worst possible purposes. And yet, you are seeing, again, this attempt to win Arab support by somehow looking as though you're putting clamps on the state of Israel, when in reality, what the United States should be saying to Israel is, you do what you need to do, and we will push everybody else off the ball. If you appear to be holding Israel back, if you appear to be trying to tell Israel to back off, then what you're really doing is you're providing fodder for the so-called Arab street. Because if you keep saying to Israel over and over and over, you guys don't violate human rights, then you are playing directly into the narrative, which is that there's some sort of human rights comparison between the state of Israel and its enemies. Are you tired of the lies and the twists of the mainstream media talking points? Yeah, me too. Join me in my newest series, Facts, where I dismantle and bring truth to this tiring mainstream agenda.
With locations across the U.S., Storage Post has a wide variety of amenities that will keep you coming back.
70 years have passed since the Nakba, the catastrophe in Arabic, took place in Palestine in 1948, in which more than 750,000 Palestinians were forcefully displaced from their homes and pushed into refugee camps in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and neighboring countries. But the Nakba didn't end in 1948. The catastrophe continues to affect more than 12 million Palestinians, who remain stateless today. Historical Palestine was mostly made up of Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and a small number of Jews, who generally lived together peacefully. The persecution of Jews across Europe led them to believe that they were not safe there, and Zionists saw Palestine as a prime location for a Jewish homeland.
And it was clear that there were Palestinians on the land. The Zionist leaders and common people alike got used to the idea that the only way of making Palestine a Jewish state is by causing the Palestinians to leave.
The Jewish Zionist movement began organizing immigration and buying land in Palestine. This was the first step in turning Palestine into a Jewish homeland. Then, World War I began. Britain promised Zionist support for a Jewish national home in Palestine. This came as a formal political letter, known today as the Balfour Declaration. It also included that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. When World War I ended and the Ottoman Empire was declared, Britain occupied Palestine.
Britain provided the muscle under which they could simply emigrate. I mean, they couldn't have immigrated were it not for the British presence. Because the crucial battle in the early stages was simply getting Jews into Palestine and acquiring land. They couldn't have done that without British government's sponsorship.
Jewish migration into Palestine continued for decades, and the Palestinian people organized large demonstrations against this influx. Palestinians saw British support of Zionism as biased and unfair. So the people of Palestine revolted in 1936 to fight against British and Zionist occupation. During the 3-year uprising, thousands of Palestinians were killed, and hundreds of British citizens and Jewish Zionists died as well. Britain dismantled the Palestinian Revolution, leaving them with no political or military leadership. However, the British also began limiting Jewish migration. This upset the Jews who had fought with the British during the uprising and led them to create their own forces. Zionist militias carried out bombing attacks against both the British and the Palestinians. As things got out of hand, the British announced in 1947 that they'd be ending their mandate on Palestine. The file on Palestine was then transferred to the UN, which suggested dividing Palestine into an Arab and Jewish state. As the British were preparing to leave, the new Jewish population began taking over, and it helped that they were heavily armed. The ethnic cleansing of Palestinians began months before the British officially left Palestine. Zionists were taking over major cities and hundreds of villages, forcing thousands of Palestinians into neighboring countries.
It happened many times that the Israeli, very holy soldiers took 10 of the youngsters in the middle of the village, shot them, just in order to kill them, in order that all the others will see it and run away. And if it's not enough, they took others also.
The British ended their mandate on May 14, 1948, leaving their tanks and armored weapons to the newly created State of Israel. From the time the British occupied Palestine in 1917 to when they left in 1948, the number of Jews is estimated to have multiplied 10 times to 500,000. As Zionist Jews declared the State of Israel on May 14, 1948, the surrounding Arab nations declared war, with the objective of liberating Palestine. Although Palestine had the support of other Arab nations and they outnumbered the Jewish population, the Israelis also had foreign military, political, and financial support.
They were highly prepared, highly dedicated, well-armed, fighting force, which was superior to all the Arab armies combined.
Israel grew beyond the UN partition lines during the Arab-Israeli War by destroying Arab villages and further reducing the Palestinian population. By April 1949, more than 500 villages and 10 cities were captured by the Israelis. Over 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes, and over 13,000 Palestinians had been killed. Even then, the Nakba did not end. Today, Israel occupies the whole of historical Palestine. Israelis continue to build illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian territories. Palestinians in the West Bank live under military law, which subjects them to checkpoints, curfews, and arbitrary arrests. Palestinians in Gaza live under a blockade imposed by Israel. Gaza is set to become unlivable by 2020. Palestinians today continue to demand their right to return to their homes. For them, the Nakba will not end until this right is granted.
Bosch, just get a Ruger SR9 and customize it. You're a nerd. Ruger SR9. Not really my style. It's a pretty gun, but not really my style. If anything, if there's any, if I ever wanted, like, a real, like, showboat pistol to customize, it would be, like, a Luger or something. Like one of those old pistols, you know? I don't know what the closest equivalent to a modern Luger would be.
Springfield
Is there such thing as a modern
1911.
Luger? I don't like them.
This
Maybe
thing's
not a
really
Luger.
nice.
What's the gun that has the magazine in front of the trigger? What is that? Is that a Mauser? Yeah, that's a Mauser. Like the broom handle. I would get one of those. My father had a replication one of these that he did some work with. Show it. The Mauser. You've seen it before, probably in like Resident Evil 4. It's this. If there was ever an old gun that I would buy, that I would like have just because I think it's cool design-wise, it'd be this. They're very cool. They have this really intricate like hammer mechanism. If you have your hand back here when it fires, you're in trouble. Is the point basically? I heard they're reliable. Yeah, they're good pistols for their time.
They're not that
by today's
reliable.
standards, obviously, they're complete dog shit. You know. I googled Mauser C96 custom and this came up. What a monstrosity! Good lord.
What the fuck?
Okay. Why Nazi pistols? These were manufactured way before the Nazis. Nazis had Lugers. Yeah, when I think Nazi pistol, I think of the Luger pistol, not the Mauser.
yeah.
The Mauser is old, like old. The Luger is what I associate with the Nazis. That's this one. So I'm pretty sure this was also made before the Nazis. Let me see. Luger P08. Yeah, it was produced all the way back in the 19th century, 1898. But this is it kept being produced up until 49, so this would have been the one they would have used. I think of the Walther for Nazis. Yeah, the P38. They're also a very pretty gun, but I think that's just because I like how older guns look, because they're a lot less like blocky. I don't know. I would consider this like a nice pistol to own, except it's literally a Nazi pistol. What Soviet World War II pistol? There we go. That's an old pistol that I can own. They had a gun. Oh yeah, they had a revolver back then. The Soviets were rootin' tootin' pointin' shootin'. The Makarov pistol. The Makarov pistol is so space age. Look at this thing. Does this not look like a Jetsons pistol? The way they have like the sort of
fuck. Who the fuck has that? Who I know?
Walther PPK clone. Yeah, I remember reading this isn't the best pistol, or maybe I'm wrong. Looks kind of odd. I could be wrong on that. Is it a decent pistol? Yeah. Of course, Americans win the World War II pistol game, obviously, because we had the 1911. That easily wins the World War II pistol game. Like, no, not even close. The 1911 is still widely used and celebrated, and it's a gigantic brick of a gun compared to the relatively small Soviet Nazi standard firearms. Yeah, still used to this day. Look at that. You can find guns that look like 1911s in any gun shop in the world, basically. They are all over the place. Replications of them, you know, still being produced. That's a high power, though. This? I just Googled 1911. Come on. That's a Russian 1911 knockoff. Okay, well, here's the original 1911, but, like, there's a million modern 1911s. The way you can tell you're looking at a 1911 or something built like a 1911 is it has a big rectangular grip that's a little bit uncomfortably long.
Also, nowadays,
the
they
grip,
have this safety mechanism
right
right
here.
here.
Just like a flat rectangle. It has a lateral trigger, like the trigger is like a solid block that gets pulled in, and also it's big. Also, micro 1911s are legitimately the stupidest looking guns in the world because trying to
one of my
miniaturize
buddies
all
has
of these,
one of those.
all of these design features. There's the Kimber Micro. Look at that. How do you look at that? I have the larger version of this. I have two of the larger versions of this, actually. The full-size 5- and 6-inch pistols, respectively. But when you microize it, it's so dumb looking. It's so silly. Romans would say that's civilized, not small. Oh, man. This is the most competition pistol I've ever seen. Competition pistols are cool because all of them cost $5,000, and they're bad at everything except being accurate. Like, everything is sacrificed for pure accuracy. And as a consequence of that, if you look up competition pistols, they look insane. The MPA DS9 DL Steel Challenge pistol. I would own this. Purely because
for aesthetic
it's psychotic,
reasons,
you know, and very accurate. God, look at that. This one looks kind of nice. Actually, if you remove the gigantic optic on this, don't you think this would look like really sleek, actually? Yeah, this is like a gamer pistol. This is like you have your gamer chair and your gamer wireless earbuds, and you pull out the gat.
All right, so now I'm going to go attack this guy. Because he fucking attacked me. Ew, what the fuck? Why is he showing its balls? What a fucking weirdo.
Love him. What? Big sneeze? Okay. We sneezing big. And he zooms. My goodness. You know who I appreciate? Yeah, big lick.
Is this all that? Okay.
All right, fat boy.
This is pre-based what Matt Gaetz said.
Why not have it all? Meet Kachava.
Boom. Fuck
Your
you.
daily super blend.
I have this every day.
I love it.
Amazing.
I just love it. Love the taste.
This superfood does everything.
For your gut, your brain, your muscles, your skin, your hair, your heart, your whole health.
I really feel like this has helped me
Yeah,
be
fuck
my
you,
best.
bitch.
It makes me feel
Fuck
so good.
you.
I've seen a lot of benefits so far.
An abundance of energy.
I sleep better.
8 of us who voted to remove Kevin McCarthy have just sent a letter to our colleagues, really encouraging them to
You
vote for
should be
Jim Jordan for
castrated.
Speaker. And it seems as though the 20 or so holdouts against Jim Jordan have no goals, have no asks, have no objectives, other than to see the 8 of us suffer some consequence for having removed McCarthy. So we've made them an offer. The 8 of us have said that we are willing to accept censure, sanction, suspension, removal from the Republican conference. We, of course, will remain Republicans. We will continue to vote with Republicans on Republican principles. But if what these holdouts need is a pound of our flesh, we're willing to give it to them in order to see them elect Jim Jordan for Speaker.
All 8 of you agree to that?
That's correct. Well, I would say that we've got a speaker designate. We could elect him. We could have a speaker right now. And, you know, I think the world was on fire when America sat atop a $33 trillion debt with no plan to reduce spending. I think the world was on fire as we watched the dollar just continue to slip away in its status as the global reserve currency. So maybe when the lobbyists and the special interests don't have total control of a Speaker of the House, they think the world is on fire and in chaos. But we actually believe this is governing, this is legislating, this is working through our differences.
One sec.
8 of us who
I
voted to
rewatched
remove
that.
Kevin McCarthy have just sent a letter to our colleagues, really encouraging them to vote for Jim Jordan for Speaker. And it
Bro,
seems as
these
though the
motherfuckers are
20
so
or
annoying.
holdouts against Jim Jordan have no goals, have no asks, have no objectives, other than to see the 8 of us suffer some consequence for having removed McCarthy. So we've made them an offer. The 8 of us have said that we are willing to accept censure, sanction, suspension, removal from the Republican conference. We, of course, will remain Republicans. We will continue to vote with Republicans on Republican principles. But if what these holdouts need is a pound of our flesh, we're willing to give it to them in order to see them elect Jim Jordan for Speaker.
All 8 of you agree to that?
That's correct. Well, I would say that we've got a speaker designate. We could elect him. We could have a speaker right now. And, you know, I think the world was on fire when America sat atop a $33 trillion debt with no plan to reduce spending. I think the world was on fire as we watched the dollar just continue to slip away in its status as the global reserve currency. So maybe when the lobbyists and the special interests don't have total control of a Speaker of the House, they think the world is on fire and in chaos. But we actually believe this is governing, this is legislating, this is working through our differences. We believe Jim Jordan is an inspirational Republican candidate for House Speaker. And for those who are holding out, we would simply ask, you know, what do you want? Other than for us to suffer some consequence, which we stand ready to endure.
For 9.5 months, the Republican
What are you doing?
We delivered no wins for the American people for the first 9.5 months. The 2 opportunities we had to force positive change in the American people with the Democrat Senate and Democrat White House was the debt ceiling and the continuing resolution, both of which we did what Democrats overwhelmingly wanted us to do. Jim Jordan represents a chance to put a fighter and a leader at the top of the Republican Congress that will actually work for the American people instead of the special interests.
I talked to them. They say that they have no problem with Jim Jordan. They say strong arm tactics. They say the machine is de-squeezed. They don't trust him. Saying the same things you said about Kevin McCarthy. How do you not respect that kind of thing?
Well, we know Jim Jordan. I've worked with Jim Jordan on the House Judiciary Committee. He's not a person who leads through strong arm tactics. I think that Jim Jordan is being unfairly blamed by some for the tactics of outside groups that Jim Jordan has no control over. You know, we want to meet with our colleagues. We want to understand how they can get to a comfort level with Jim Jordan. You know, we in January allowed the ascent of Kevin McCarthy to the speakership. We had specific goals. When, you know, those promises were made to meet those goals, we were willing to work with the team. So our call is to our fellow Republicans to vote with the team, work with the team, help us elect a Republican speaker. Hold on.
We are keeping a close
All
eye on
right.
the action unfolding in.
I'm gonna be done streaming. It's late. I gotta work early in the morning, so we're done. I'll I'll continue playing this tomorrow. Probably watch some videos. I don't know. Hopefully there's some news. They might vote on a speaker today. But I don't know. So, doses.